You are actually marrying a security guard. My mother scoffed, tossing my hand-pressed gold foil invitation onto the kitchen counter like it was a piece of junk mail. Do not expect us to sit in some cheap rental hall and watch you throw your life away on a man who checks identification badges at a lobby desk. I sent out 66 invitations to my blood relatives. I received 0 replies. My entire family boycotted my wedding day. I walked down the aisle completely alone, clutching my bouquet with trembling hands. Then right in the middle of our elegant reception, my phone blew up. My mother, my father, my golden child sister, all calling back to back, frantic and desperate. All because a guest posted a 15-second video of our first dance and captioned it, "The CEO of Vanguard Elite Security just tied the knot." Before I tell you how my family's ultimate betrayal turned into their absolute ruin, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The morning sun over Napa Valley was breathtaking, casting a golden glow over the sprawling vineyard estate I had booked for my wedding. As a high-end corporate event planner, I spent my entire career orchestrating million-dollar galas for elite clients, so when it came to my own special day, I spared no expense. The venue was an exclusive winery tucked away in the rolling hills, featuring crystal chandeliers draped in white orchids and a reception space that looked like a scene from a classic movie. I stood in the bridal suite, adjusting the train of my custom silk gown, listening to the gentle hum of the string quartet warming up down below. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite, I had a perfect view of the ceremony lawn. The right side of the aisle was packed. Malik's family and our mutual friends were mingling, finding their seats, laughing and taking photos. His aunts were dressed in their Sunday best, his cousins were passing out programs, and the atmosphere was filled with genuine warmth. But when I looked to the left side of the aisle, my stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. 66 mahogany chairs sat completely empty. I checked my phone for the 100th time that morning. Not a single text, not a single missed call. I had spent the last 10 months planning every detail, ensuring the travel accommodations were perfect for my family. I had even sent them luxury hotel vouchers, hoping to make the trip from Atlanta as easy as possible. But the left side of the aisle remained a ghost town. My mother Valerie and my father Calvin had made their disapproval of Malik crystal clear from the moment I introduced him. Because Malik often wore a black tactical uniform when he was working in the field, my parents immediately wrote him off as an entry-level mall cop. They never bothered to ask what he actually did. They never asked about the company name on his uniform. In their status-obsessed minds, I was settling for a man at the bottom of the financial food chain. My phone vibrated on the vanity table, pulling me out of my thoughts. The caller identification flashed with my brother's name. I snatched it up, my heart leaping with a sudden, desperate hope. Maybe they were just running late. Maybe their shuttle got lost on the way up the valley. I answered the call, taking a deep breath. "Trey, please tell me you guys are almost here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The string quartet is about to start playing the processional music." Instead of an apology, I heard the loud, obnoxious bass of a hip-hop track playing in the background, followed by the unmistakable sound of people splashing in a swimming pool. Trey let out a loud, exasperated sigh that sounded entirely too casual for a man calling his sister on her wedding day. "Kendra," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mom said to tell you we are not coming. We are at Brianna's house for a barbecue." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air straight out of my lungs. "You are at a barbecue?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Trey, today is my wedding day. You all RSVP'd yes months ago." "Nobody is coming to watch you throw your life away on a mall cop," Trey sneered over the loud music. "Mom and Dad are embarrassed, Kendra. Preston is here smoking ribs on his new outdoor grill, and he was just saying how ridiculous it is that you expect us to fly all the way to California to sit in some cheap hall and watch you marry a guy who probably makes minimum wage. Do not call us for a handout when he cannot pay the rent next month." The mention of Preston sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through my veins. Preston was my younger sister Brianna's husband. He was an arrogant, wealthy white finance executive who constantly flaunted his money, and my parents absolutely worshipped the ground he walked on. Ever since Brianna married him, my parents treated them like royalty while looking at me like a massive disappointment. I had been financially independent since I was 18 years old, paying my own way through college and building my event planning firm from nothing. Meanwhile, my parents were constantly bailing Brianna out of credit card debt and taking out loans to fund her lavish lifestyle just to keep up appearances for Preston's high society friends. I listened to the laughter in the background of Trey's call. I could hear my mother's voice calling out for someone to hand her a drink. They were actively celebrating their decision to abandon me. "You know I paid for this entire Napa wedding myself, right?" I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound heartbreak. "I flew you all out here. I booked your hotel rooms. I have never asked Mom and Dad for a single dime in 17 years. "Yeah, well, Mom said she is not supporting this circus," Trey replied, completely ignoring my words. "You should have listened to Dad when he told you to find a man with a real portfolio like Preston. Anyway, Brianna wants me to take a picture of the stakes. Have fun at your little party, Kendra." The line went dead. I stood in the center of the luxurious bridal suite staring at the darkened screen of my phone. The rejection was absolute. They had coordinated this. They had deliberately let me book their rooms and arranged their seating only to stay back in Atlanta and throw a pool party just to put me in my place. They wanted to punish me for not marrying a man who fit their shallow criteria of success. A heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the sound of the wedding coordinator knocking gently on the oak door. "Miss Kendra," the coordinator said softly, peeking her head inside. "The guests are seated. It is time for you to walk." I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, and my chest heaved with suppressed sobs. I wanted to collapse right there on the pristine carpet and cancel the entire event. But then I thought about Malik. I thought about the man who held my hand when I was stressed, who stayed up late helping me address envelopes, who looked at me like I was the only woman on the planet. I refused to let my family's toxic vanity steal my joy. I took a deep breath, wiped the corners of my eyes, and nodded. "I am ready," I said. The heavy double doors of the estate opened, and the string quartet transitioned into a beautiful sweeping melody. I stepped out onto the stone pathway that led down to the ceremony lawn. As I began my walk down the aisle, a hush fell over the crowd. I could feel the eyes of the guests shifting from my face to the completely empty left side of the seating arrangement. 66 vacant chairs sat in glaring contrast to the packed, joyful crowd on the right. I heard the soft, confused whispers of Malik's relatives. I saw his mother cover her mouth in shock, realizing what my family had done. The walk felt like it took a lifetime. The physical sensation of being utterly abandoned by my own blood weighed down every step I took, making my custom gown feel like it was made of lead. But then I forced my eyes forward and I saw Malik. I was standing at the altar in a sharply tailored midnight blue tuxedo, looking incredibly handsome. He possessed a calm, grounded presence that always made me feel safe. His tactical background shined through his perfect posture and the steady, unwavering way he held my gaze. When he saw the tears threatening to spill over my eyelashes, he did not hesitate. Breaking tradition, Malik stepped down from the altar and walked halfway up the aisle to meet me. The whispers in the crowd stopped completely. Malik gently took my trembling hands in his warm, strong grip. He pulled me close, ignoring the formal setting, and used his thumb to wipe a stray tear from my cheek. "They made their choice," he whispered, so only I could hear. His voice was a deep, soothing rumble. "Now we make ours. You are my family now, Kendra. You will never walk alone again." His words wrapped around my fractured heart, pulling the broken pieces back together. The humiliation I felt seconds ago burned away, leaving behind a fierce, undeniable resolve. I lifted my chin, squeezed his hands, and walked the rest of the way to the altar by his side. The ceremony was beautiful. When we exchanged our vows, I looked into his eyes and recalled every time my parents had disrespected him. I remembered family dinners where Preston would make snide remarks about Malik's security uniform, asking if he got a discount at the food court. I remembered how Malik never took the bait, how he always responded with a polite, knowing smile that Preston was too arrogant to understand. Malik never felt the need to prove himself to them, and standing there reciting my vows, I realized I did not need to prove myself to them either. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and the right side of the aisle erupted into thunderous applause and joyous cheering. Malik kissed me deeply, and as we walked back up the aisle together, I did not even glance at the empty chairs. My old family was gone, but my new family was right here holding my hand. The transition to the reception was seamless. The outdoor patio was transformed into a magical dining space with cascading fairy lights and long tables laden with gourmet food. The wine flowed, the speeches from Malik's friends were hilarious and heartfelt, and for the first couple of hours I completely forgot about the barbecue happening in Atlanta. I was laughing so hard my sides ached, surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated our union. We eventually made our way to the sweetheart table to sit down and enjoy the main course. I reached for my glass of champagne, feeling a profound sense of peace. But then my phone, which was sitting face down next to my floral centerpiece, began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then twice, then continuously in a frantic, aggressive rhythm. I frowned, setting down my glass and picking up the device. The screen lit up, revealing a barrage of notifications that made my heart race. 47 missed calls. I stared at the screen in disbelief. There were 15 missed calls from my mother Valerie, 12 from my father Calvin, 10 from Brianna, and a handful from Trey. My text message inbox was exploding with notifications from the exact same people who had laughed at me on the phone just 3 hours ago. The group chat that had been dead all week was now a rapid-fire stream of panic. I unlocked my phone, my hands shaking slightly, and tapped on the most recent notification. It was an Instagram alert. A high-profile guest sitting just a few tables away had tagged Malik and me in a video. The guest was a well-known tech billionaire from Silicon Valley, a man Malik considered a mentor and close friend. He had posted a 15-second reel of Malik and me during our first dance. I tapped the video to watch it. The footage showed us swaying beautifully under the fairy lights, the billionaire panning the camera to show the incredibly lavish Napa Valley setup. But it was not the video that had my family in a frenzy. It was the caption underneath it. Huge congratulations to my brother Malik, founder and CEO of Vanguard Elite Security, tying the knot today with his beautiful bride. This man built an empire from the ground up. Proud to call you a friend. #billion-dollar-groom. I read the caption twice, letting the reality of the situation sink in. Malik was not a mall cop. He was the founder and chief executive officer of a global private security and defense contracting firm. His company handled high-level threat assessments, corporate defense, and private security for some of the biggest executives in the world. Vanguard was currently valued at over $800 million. I met Malik when he was personally auditing the security protocols for a massive corporate retreat I was planning. He wore a standard tactical uniform that day because he believed in being hands-on with his ground team. When I brought him home to meet my family, they saw the uniform, saw a hard-working black man, and immediately made their own classist assumptions. They never bothered to ask him about his title. They never asked for the name of his company. They simply labeled him a guard and treated him like dirt. Malik and I found their assumptions so ridiculous that we decided not to correct them. Malik wanted to see who would respect him for his character, rather than his net worth. The notification screen flashed again right in my hand. My mother was calling for the 15th time. I looked at Malik, who was calmly eating his steak, perfectly aware of the phone buzzing in my hand. He gave me a small, knowing smile and nodded. I answered the call and pressed the speakerphone button, setting the device on the table between us. "Kendra, baby, my mother!" Valerie screeched through the speaker. Her tone had completely shifted from the dismissive disgust I heard earlier. Now she sounded breathless, frantic, and incredibly fake. There was a massive mix-up with our flights. "We are at the airport right now, trying to get there. Tell the venue to hold the dinner service. We are coming." I stared at the phone, a cold wave of clarity washing over me. I did not let her spin the lie. I did not let her pretend she cared about my wedding. "There is no flight mix-up, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm, cutting through her frantic performance. "Trey already told me you were at Brianna's barbecue. He said you were embarrassed to watch me marry a mall cop, so enjoy the hot dogs." Valerie sputtered on the other end of the line, her voice hitching. "No, Kendra, you misunderstood Trey. I was just joking. We have your gift, we were just delayed. Please, baby, you cannot get married without your family there. We are your family. You stopped being my family the second you let 66 chairs sit empty to prove a point, I replied firmly. You saw a 15-second clip on Instagram and realized you boycotted the wrong tax bracket. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this is about love. It is about access, and you just permanently lost yours. Before Valerie could launch into another round of fake apologies, Malik leaned across the sweetheart table toward the phone. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and spoke with quiet, absolute authority. Valerie, tell Preston to check his email. Vanguard just finalized our latest corporate acquisition. I ended the call immediately, severing the connection before she could respond. The silence at our table felt incredibly powerful. Malik picked up his champagne glass and clinked it against mine. Now that the trash took itself out, he said smoothly, let us enjoy our wedding. 66 empty chairs sat on the left side of the aisle. My entire blood family had boycotted my wedding day because they were too embarrassed to watch me marry a man they thought was just a security guard. They told me they would rather be at a backyard barbecue than watch me throw my life away on someone who checks badges for a living. I walked down the aisle completely alone, swallowing my tears. But 2 hours later, during our reception, my phone started ringing off the hook. My mother, my father, and my spoiled sister were suddenly desperate to reach me. All because a tech billionaire guest posted a 15-second video of our first dance and revealed the massive secret my husband and I had been keeping. Before I tell you how my family panicked when they realized they threw away their golden ticket, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family to protect your peace. I sat at the sweetheart table looking out at the beautiful reception we had built. The Napa Valley estate was glowing under the fairy lights, and the dance floor was packed with Malik family and our friends. I was finally feeling a sense of peace after the absolute humiliation of walking down the aisle alone. But then my phone, which was sitting face down next to my floral centerpiece, began to vibrate. It buzzed once then, twice then, continuously in a frantic, aggressive rhythm that rattled the crystal champagne flutes. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone as it vibrated against the table. 47 missed calls. The number hovered over the messages application, like a digital badge of their sudden, frantic desperation. Just hours ago, my brother Trey had laughed at the idea of watching me marry a mall cop. He had sneered over the phone, telling me my family was at my sister Brianna's house eating hot dogs instead of attending my lavish wedding. Now my phone was practically melting in my hand from their relentless attempts to reach me. I picked up the device, my thumb hovering over the screen. My first instinct was to turn it off completely and toss it into my beaded clutch. I was sitting next to my husband, feeling the warmth of his shoulder against mine, and I did not want to let their toxic energy infect our reception. The string quartet had been replaced by a phenomenal live band, and the joy in the room was palpable. But the group chat notifications were cascading down my screen so fast I could barely read them. Trey had sent 20 texts in the span of 5 minutes. Brianna had sent a dozen more, all in capital letters. My father Calvin had left 3 urgent voicemails. I unlocked the screen, intending to put the phone on Do Not Disturb, when an Instagram alert caught my eye. It was a tag notification from one of our very important guests sitting just a few tables away. The guest was Marcus Sterling, a well-known tech billionaire from Silicon Valley. Malik had provided executive protection for Marcus during a highly publicized overseas tour a few years back, and the two men had formed a tight bond. Marcus considered Malik a mentor and a close friend. I tapped the notification and the application opened to a 15-second reel Marcus had just posted. The video was stunning. It showed Malik and me swaying together during our first dance under a canopy of twinkling lights. Marcus had panned his camera to capture the sheer opulence of the estate, highlighting the crystal chandeliers suspended from the open-air tent and the massive floral installations. It was a beautiful testament to the wedding I had paid for entirely on my own. But it was not the video itself that had sent my family into an absolute tailspin back in Atlanta. It was the caption Marcus had typed underneath it. Huge congratulations to my brother Malik, founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Elite Security, tying the knot today with his beautiful bride. This man built a global empire from the ground up. Proud to call you a friend. #billion-dollar groom. I read the caption twice, letting the absolute poetry of the moment wash over me. The post already had tens of thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. Because my sister Brianna was obsessed with high society and followed every major billionaire and socialite on the internet. The algorithm had undoubtedly served the video straight to her feed. Malik was not a mall cop. He had never been a mall cop. My brilliant, handsome husband was the founder and chief executive officer of a global private security and defense contracting firm. Vanguard Elite Security handled threat assessments, corporate defense, and private executive protection for some of the biggest names in the tech and finance worlds. His company was currently valued at over $800 million. I met Malik 2 years ago when he was personally auditing the security protocols for a massive corporate retreat I was organizing for a major client. As the chief executive, he did not have to be on the ground, but Malik was the kind of leader who never asked his men to do a job he would not do himself. He showed up to the venue walkthrough wearing his standard black tactical uniform, a radio on his shoulder, and an intense focus in his eyes. We clashed immediately over table placements blocking emergency exits, but by the end of the week we were sharing coffee and talking about our dreams. When I finally brought him home to Atlanta to meet my family for the first time, they took one look at his tactical uniform and made their own classist, ignorant assumptions. My mother Valerie saw a hard-working black man in a uniform and immediately categorized him as entry-level security. My father Calvin, who worshipped corporate titles and stock portfolios, dismissed him completely. They never bothered to ask him about his specific role. They never asked for the name of the company on his uniform patch. They simply labeled him a guard and treated him like he was entirely beneath them. At that first dinner, Brianna's husband Preston had made snide remarks about minimum wage and long shifts at the mall. Malik had just smiled that calm, knowing smile of his and answered politely. Later that night, I was furious and wanted to set them straight. I wanted to scream that the man they were insulting could buy and sell Preston's entire finance firm before breakfast. But Malik stopped me. He told me he wanted to see who would respect him for his character rather than his net worth. He said wealth often acted as a filter that blinded people to true intentions. By letting my family believe their own shallow narrative, we got to see exactly who they really were. We watched them fawn over Preston because he wore an expensive watch and a tailored suit, while they treated Malik like dirt because he wore tactical boots. Now the truth was out there, broadcasting live to the exact social circles my mother and sister desperately wanted to impress. The realization of what they had thrown away was causing a spectacular meltdown across the country. My phone buzzed again, nearly vibrating out of my hand. I scrolled through the frantic text messages in the family group chat. Brianna had typed asking if this was real, and if he really was the chief executive of Vanguard. She demanded to know why I did not tell them. Trey had followed up demanding I pick up the phone right now because our mother was having a panic attack and our father was trying to book a flight. They were not sorry they missed my wedding. They were not filled with regret because they realized they had broken my heart on the most important day of my life. They were panicking because they had publicly boycotted an event hosted by an $800 million powerhouse. They were terrified of looking foolish to their friends, and they were desperate to get back into my good graces before the doors of luxury slammed shut in their faces forever. I looked over at Malik. He was calmly cutting into his steak, perfectly aware of the phone going crazy in my hand. The ambient lighting caught the sharp line of his jaw and the quiet confidence in his posture. He did not need their validation, and neither did I. We had built our relationship on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine love. Things my family knew absolutely nothing about. He caught my staring and raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a soft smile. "Everything all right, Mrs. Vanguard?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the reception. I smiled back, feeling a profound sense of empowerment, replacing the heavy grief I had carried down the aisle. I held up my phone, showing him the screen illuminating the endless stream of notifications from my family. "They saw Marcus' post," I told him. Malik chuckled softly, setting his fork down and taking a sip of his water. "I imagine the barbecue in Atlanta just got a lot less festive," he said. As he spoke, the screen flashed with another incoming call. It was my mother, Valerie. This was her 15th attempt to reach me in the last 20 minutes. The woman who had told me earlier today that nobody wanted to watch me throw my life away on a minimum wage guard was now desperately trying to command my attention. I stared at her contact photo. A picture of her and Brianna posing at some country club luncheon looking down their noses at the camera. For 35 years, I had bent over backwards trying to earn her approval. I had funded my own, paid for my own education, and quietly bailed them out of trouble more times than I could count, just hoping that one day she would look at me with the same pride she reserved for Brianna. But she never did. Let her go to voicemail. Malik suggested, gently reaching across the table to cover my free hand with his. You do not owe them a single second of this night. This is our time. How was right. I did not owe them anything. But part of healing is establishing boundaries and forcing people to confront the reality of their own actions. Ignoring the call would let them pretend this was just a simple miscommunication. It would let them craft a new narrative where they were the victims of a confusing situation. I was not going to let them control the story anymore. I am going to answer it, I said, my voice steady and resolute. I slipped my hand out from under his and pressed the green accept button on the screen. I tapped the speakerphone icon and set the device down on the pristine white tablecloth right between my plate and Malik. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, and waited for the sound of my mother's voice to fill the space between us. I was ready. The connection clicked open, and the frantic, breathless sound of my mother Valerie echoed through the speaker on the sweetheart table. She did not even say hello. She just launched straight into a theatrical performance that deserved an Academy Award. Kendra, baby, she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured panic. Thank God you finally answered your phone. There was a massive mix-up with our flights. We are at the airport right now trying to get to you. I let her keep talking, listening to the desperate lies spill from her mouth. She claimed the airline had overbooked the flight and bumped their entire party. She said my father Calvin was at the customer service desk, screaming at the attendants to get them on a private charter. She told me Brianna was crying in the terminal because she was so heartbroken to miss her big sister walk down the aisle. Valerie begged me to tell the venue coordinator to hold the dinner service and delay the cake cutting because they were going to rent a car and drive across the state if they had to. It was a spectacular web of deception spun by a woman who realized she had just made the biggest financial mistake of her life. I looked at the beautifully arranged floral centerpieces and the crystal glasses reflecting the soft, ambient light of the Napa Valley estate. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had spent ensuring their travel accommodations were flawless. I had sent them premium plane tickets and luxury transport vouchers. There was absolutely no way an airline could have bumped a group of their size without notifying me as the account holder. But she did not know that. She thought I was naive enough to believe that the universe conspired to keep them away from my wedding. In reality, they had simply chosen not to show up, and now they were scrambling to cover their tracks. I waited until she paused to take a dramatic breath. I did not yell. I did not cry. I spoke with a quiet, chilling authority that made the air between the table and the phone feel heavy. There is no flight mix-up, Mom, I said evenly. The line went completely silent for a fraction of a second before I continued. Trey already told me exactly where you are. He answered his phone an hour before my ceremony started. I heard the music playing. I heard the splashing from the pool. He told me you were all at Brianna House having a backyard barbecue. I leaned closer to the phone, making sure she heard every single syllable. You are not at the airport fighting with gate agents. You are standing in Brianna's perfectly manicured backyard, probably holding a cocktail and sweating because you just saw Marcus Sterling post a video of my husband. So please, Mom, tell Preston to enjoy his smoked ribs and go ahead and eat a hot dog for me. I could hear the absolute terror in her shallow breathing. The background noise on her end of the call was completely silent. There were no airport announcements. There was no bustling terminal traffic. It was just the quiet hum of suburban Atlanta, confirming everything I had just said. Valerie stammered, trying to find the words to rebuild the bridge she had just burned to ashes. Kendra, baby, you misunderstood, she pleaded, her voice, dropping the frantic airport act and adopting a tone of deep maternal victimhood. Trey was just joking around. We had a small delay and decided to regroup at the house. We have your wedding gift sitting right here on the counter. We would never abandon you on purpose. You know how much family means to us. We love you and we love Malik. You do not love Malik, I stated flatly. You do not even know Malik. From the very first day I brought him to Atlanta, you looked at his tactical uniform and decided he was beneath you. You let Preston mock him at the Thanksgiving dinner table. You let my father tell me I should be embarrassed to bring a security guard into your home. You funded Brianna's entire life, paid for her massive wedding, and bailed her out of debt just so you could parade Preston around your country club friends like a trophy. You wanted a wealthy son-in-law so badly that you completely ignored the brilliant, hard-working black man sitting right in front of you. I let my words sink in, feeling a lifetime of resentment finally lifting from my shoulders. You boycotted my wedding because you wanted to teach me a lesson. You wanted me to walk down the aisle alone so I would feel the weight of your disapproval. You thought I would come crawling back to you begging for financial help because I married a man you assumed made minimum wage. But then you opened Instagram today. You saw the video. You read the caption. Now you realize that the man you treated like garbage owns an $800 million global security empire. You realize that the mall cop you laughed at commands more power and wealth than Preston could ever dream of achieving. You are not calling me because you are sorry you missed my wedding. You are calling me because you are terrified you just got locked out of a billionaire lifestyle. Valerie began to cry real tears this time. They were not tears of remorse for her daughter. They were tears of pure selfish panic. She begged me to listen, saying that family protects family and that I was letting anger cloud my judgment. She insisted that Calvin wanted to speak to Malik to welcome him properly to the family. She pleaded for a second chance to prove they could be supportive. She talked about how Brianna was so eager to introduce Preston to Malik so the two men could talk about corporate finance together. The absolute audacity of her requests made me sick to my stomach. I did not have to say another word. Malik, who had been listening to the entire exchange with an expression of mild amusement, finally decided he had heard enough. He wiped his hands with his linen napkin and shifted his weight, leaning forward, so his face was just inches from the phone. The quiet strength radiating from him was incredible. He did not raise his voice. He did not sound angry. He spoke with the terrifying calmness of a man who held all the cards. Valerie, Malik said, his deep voice silencing her frantic sobbing instantly. Do me a favor and tell Preston to step away from the barbecue grill and check his email. Vanguard Elite Security just finalized our latest corporate acquisition this morning. Before my mother could even process the weight of that statement or ask what he meant, I reached forward and ended the call. The screen went black, cutting off her panicked breathing and returning us to the joyful sounds of our wedding reception. I looked at Malik, my heart swelling with an overwhelming amount of love and respect. We sat there in the glow of the fairy lights, completely unbothered by the storm we had just unleashed in Atlanta. I set the phone face down on the table, letting the silence between Malik and me settle into something incredibly powerful. He picked up his champagne glass and clinked it against mine. Now that the trash took itself out, he said smoothly, "Let us enjoy our wedding." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in 35 years. But before I could even take a sip of my champagne, my phone screen lit up again. It was not my mother this time. It was a text message from Preston. Preston was my younger sister, Brianna's husband. He was the arrogant white finance executive my parents worshipped. The text read, "Is it true? Malik owns Vanguard. Why the hell did you not say anything?" Staring at those words glowing on my screen, a visceral wave of anger washed over me. The sheer audacity of his question transported me straight back to my parents' formal dining room 3 months prior. It was our annual family Thanksgiving dinner. My mother Valerie had spent all day obsessing over the table setting, ensuring the crystal glasses and silver flatware were perfect for Preston's arrival. When Preston and Brianna finally walked in, they were treated like visiting royalty. Preston immediately started holding court at the head of the table, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon that my father Calvin had bought specifically to impress him. Preston was bragging loudly about his latest corporate mergers, tossing around financial jargon and acting like he personally controlled the global economy. My parents hung on his every word, nodding enthusiastically, while Brianna sat beside him dripping in designer jewelry they had probably put on a credit card. Malik and I arrived a little late because he had to conduct an emergency site visit for a high-risk client. He came straight to the dinner wearing his Vanguard tactical uniform, consisting of black cargo pants, a fitted black polo, and his heavy-duty boots. He apologized politely for his attire, but my parents looked at him as if he had just dragged mud across their pristine white carpets. My father visibly cringed, pulling his collar tight, while Brianna completely ignored our arrival. We sat down at the far end of the table away from the center of attention. Preston immediately zeroed in on Malik. He leaned across the roasted turkey, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. So Malik Preston drawled his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Working the holiday shift at the mall today. Did they at least give you time and a half for guarding the food court?" My blood boiled. I opened my mouth to tear into him, but Malik gently squeezed my knee under the table. He did not look angry, he just looked mildly entertained. "Actually, I handle private security logistics." Malik answered, his tone completely even. "But yes, duty calls regardless of the holiday." Preston chuckled, shaking his head as he looked at my father. "That is cute," Preston said. "You know, Calvin, in my line of work, when we say duty calls, it means we are moving millions of dollars across international markets. But hey, somebody has to make sure the teenagers do not loiter, right?" My mother giggled from behind her linen napkin. Brianna rolled her eyes and took a sip of her wine. I could not take it anymore. "Preston, you have absolutely no idea what you are talking about." I snapped, my voice slicing through the dining room chatter. "Malik works harder than anyone at this table. You do not know the first thing about his career or his company." Before Preston could even respond, my father slammed his open palm against the mahogany table. The loud crack made everyone jump. Calvin glared at me, his eyes narrowing with deep disapproval. "That is enough, Kendra," my father commanded, his voice booming with patriarchal authority. "Preston handles multi-million-dollar portfolios for a top-tier finance firm. He is a vice president. You need to listen to him and show some respect. You should be embarrassed bringing a guard to this table and then having the nerve to raise your voice at a man who actually provides for this family." I sat there stunned by the absolute cruelty of my own father. He had reduced my brilliant partner to nothing but a uniform and elevated an arrogant bully to the status of a king simply because of his corporate title and his race. Malik did not flinch. He did not defend his net worth. He did not pull out his bank statements or scream about his $800 million company. He simply looked at my father with a calm, piercing gaze and said absolutely nothing. Later that night, when we drove back to my apartment, I asked Malik why he let them treat him like that, why he did not just tell them he owned Vanguard. He told me that a lion never feels the need to prove himself to a pack of hyenas. He said that letting them believe their own lies was the best way to see their true character. He wanted to know if they would ever respect a hardworking black man who they thought was at the bottom of the ladder. They failed his test miserably. The memory of that Thanksgiving dinner faded as the loud, joyful music of our wedding reception brought me back to the present moment. I looked down at my phone, reading Preston's frantic text message one more time. "Is it true? Malik owns Vanguard. Why the hell did you not say anything?" I looked up from the screen and watched my husband. The catering staff had just rolled out our magnificent 6-tier wedding cake onto the center of the dance floor. It was a stunning masterpiece adorned with edible gold leaf and cascading sugar flowers. But instead of a standard cake knife, Malik had brought something special for the tradition. He unsheathed a custom-engraved ceremonial sword bearing the Vanguard Elite Security crest. The polished steel gleamed under the fairy lights, and the crowd cheered at the dramatic personal touch. He stood there broad-shouldered and immaculate, looking like absolute royalty. I stood up from the sweetheart table and pulled out my phone. I opened the camera application and framed the perfect shot. I captured Malik standing tall and proud in his tailored midnight blue tuxedo, holding the Vanguard ceremonial sword, ready to cut our wedding cake. The lighting was flawless, highlighting the quiet, undeniable power he radiated. I opened the text message thread with Preston. I attached the photograph of Malik. Then I typed out my response, letting the heavy weight of the last 3 months pour into the digital keyboard. My fingers flew across the screen with surgical precision. "I did not say anything because you never asked," I typed. "You just assumed." I hit send and watched the message deliver. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of that phone in Atlanta. I knew Preston was standing in Brianna's backyard staring at a picture of the man he had repeatedly humiliated. The man he had confidently called a mall cop was holding the crest of the exact security empire that controlled his entire professional destiny. I dropped my phone back onto the table and walked over to my husband, wrapping my arms around his waist as the photographer snapped our picture. I had never felt more victorious in my entire life. But the fallout was far from over. Within 30 seconds, my phone buzzed again with another message from Preston. The tone of his text shifted from angry demand to outright terror. "Kendra, please," he typed. "My firm is facing a hostile takeover. Vanguard is the only buyer stepping in to acquire us. Malik holds my entire career in his hands. If this deal goes south, I lose my partner status. You have to tell him to proceed. Call me right now." I stared at the screen, reading his desperate plea. The mighty finance executive who had belittled my husband at the Thanksgiving table was now begging for mercy through a text message. He was sweating in his expensive polo shirt, realizing that his entire professional future depended on the good graces of the security guard he had openly mocked. I did not reply. I simply locked my screen and turned my full attention back to my gorgeous billionaire groom. Let him sweat, I thought to myself. The true reckoning was just beginning. I slipped my phone into my beaded clutch, snapping the gold clasp shut and locking away Preston and his desperate, pathetic pleas. The sheer irony of his terror was almost intoxicating. For the past 6 months, Preston had been absolutely insufferable. He worked as a vice president for a boutique wealth management firm in Atlanta that was secretly bleeding capital. At every single family dinner, he would loudly brag about a massive financial lifeline his firm was desperately trying to secure. He claimed a megacorporation was swooping in for a corporate buyout, an acquisition that would elevate him to senior partner and secure his multi-million-dollar bonuses. He used these family gatherings to lecture my father about high-level corporate strategy, puffing out his chest and using his supposed corporate triumphs to belittle my husband. What Preston did not know was that Vanguard Elite Security was not just a company that provided bodyguards. Vanguard was a massive holding corporation with a highly aggressive private equity arm. Malik and his acquisitions team were the exact corporate entity buying out Preston and his failing firm. Malik had known this the entire time. He had sat across from Preston eating dry turkey and lumpy mashed potatoes, listening to this arrogant, insecure man insult his tactical uniform. Malik had calmly absorbed every single racist, classist remark, all while holding the absolute power to liquidate Preston and his entire livelihood with a single stroke of his pen. I had asked Malik once why he did not just drop the hammer on them right then and there. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized they were insulting a billionaire. But Malik told me that true power never needs to shout. He wanted to give my parents and my sister every possible opportunity to show some basic human decency. He wanted to see if they could love me enough to respect the man I chose regardless of his tax bracket or his job title. He wanted to know if they would protect me or throw me to the wolves. They failed his test with flying colors. By letting them believe their own shallow narrative, Malik allowed them to dig their own graves. Now they had thrown away their relationship with me right as Preston and his career were placed directly onto Malik and his chopping block. We spent the rest of our reception completely insulated from the toxic meltdown happening 3 time zones away. I danced with my new father-in-law, a retired fire chief, who welcomed me into his family with warm, open arms. I drank expensive champagne with my bridesmaids, laughing until my stomach ached. We ate our incredible cake toasted to our future and celebrated surrounded strictly by people who valued our character over our bank accounts. Every time I felt my clutch vibrate against the sweetheart table, I felt a spark of pure vindication. My family was spending my wedding night pacing their floors, drowning in regret and absolute panic. I did not shed a single tear for them. The next morning, Malik and I woke up in our luxury villa overlooking the rolling vineyards of Napa Valley. The sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting a warm, peaceful glow over the room. We ordered breakfast in bed, and I finally pulled my phone out of my clutch to assess the damage. The numbers were staggering. My screen was a digital graveyard of my family and their dignity. Brianna had left several sobbing voicemails. She was not crying because she missed seeing her big sister walk down the aisle. She was crying because Preston was reportedly pacing holes in their hardwood floors, vomiting from stress. My father Calvin had sent long formal text messages attempting to assert his patriarchal authority. He demanded that I arrange a sit-down meeting between him, Preston, and Malik immediately. I typed that family business must be handled internally, as if he had not just allowed his entire family to publicly abandon me on my wedding day. My mother Valerie was busy playing the victim. She had been texting my aunts and uncles trying to spin a frantic narrative that I had maliciously hidden Malik and his wealth just to make my own parents look foolish. I read the pathetic messages out loud to Malik as he buttered his toast. He just smiled, his dark eyes sparkling with quiet amusement. "Let them wait," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "They made their choice yesterday. Today is about us." We turned our phones off completely for the next 2 days. We went off the grid and enjoyed a beautiful private mini-moon. We took a hot air balloon ride over the valley at sunrise. We went to private wine tastings and ate incredible food. We existed purely for each other, completely untethered from the toxic weight I had carried my entire life. For 35 years, I had bent over backwards to accommodate their conditional love. I had played the role of the reliable, independent daughter, while they poured all their affection and resources into Brianna. Walking down that aisle alone was the most painful thing I had ever experienced, but it was also the most liberating. It severed the invisible strings they had used to control my emotions. I was finally free. On Tuesday morning, it was time to fly back home. We were not returning to the modest apartment my family assumed I still lived in. When Malik and I got serious, we had moved in together. We shared a sprawling, ultra-luxury penthouse in the heart of the city financial district. The building featured private elevator access, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, and round-the-clock concierge service. My family never knew about it because they had never once bothered to visit me in the city. They always demanded I drive out to the suburbs for their events, claiming the city traffic was too inconvenient for them. They had no idea about the life I was actually living. But desperate people have a way of finding things out. Preston had likely used his corporate resources to run a background check or pull property records on Malik. Because as our private black car pulled up to the highly secured entrance of our residential building, the driver suddenly slowed down. I looked through the tinted passenger window and my breath caught in my throat. It was a pathetic, desperate sight. Huddled near the massive glass doors of the private lobby, clutching their expensive handbags and looking absolutely exhausted, were my mother Valerie, my father Calvin, my sister Brianna, and her husband Preston. They had tracked down our address and staked out our building, waiting to ambush us. The true confrontation was finally here. The driver shifted the black luxury sport utility vehicle into park and stepped out to open my door. The cool city breeze hit my face the moment I stepped onto the pristine pavement. Our building was an architectural marvel of steel and tinted glass, standing tall in the absolute center of the financial district. A team of doormen stood inside the lobby behind a massive marble reception desk. And right outside those sliding glass doors, looking entirely out of place and visibly exhausted, stood my family. They had clearly been waiting for hours. My father Calvin was pacing back and forth, his usually immaculate suit looking rumpled and creased. Brianna was leaning against a concrete planter, rubbing her temples and complaining to Preston, who was furiously typing on his phone with shaking hands. But it was my mother Valerie who spotted us first. "Kendra," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the concrete and glass. She shoved past Preston and sprinted toward our vehicle, her designer heels clicking frantically against the pavement. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure theatrical agony. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, leaving dark trails of ruined mascara. She threw her arms open wide, preparing to pull me into a tight, desperate embrace. "Kendra, baby," she wailed, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "We were so worried. We have been waiting out here all morning. You have to believe us, there was a terrible mistake. The invitations were confusing. The printing was so small and we got the date completely wrong. We thought the wedding was next weekend. When we realized our mistake, we tried to call, but your phone was off. Please, you have to forgive us." I stood perfectly still, letting her close the distance. But the moment she reached for me, I took a sharp, deliberate step back. She stumbled slightly, her empty arms falling awkwardly to her sides. I looked at her completely unfazed by the performance. Behind her, Calvin, Brianna, and Preston were hurrying over their faces, pale and anxious. "You got the date wrong," I asked, my voice echoing with icy calm. 66 adults all managed to read the same gold foil invitation, and somehow every single one of you marked the wrong weekend on your calendars. That is the story you are going with. Valerie nodded aggressively, wiping her fake tears with the back of her hand. Yes, baby. It was a massive misunderstanding. You know I would never miss my eldest daughter walking down the aisle. You are my flesh and blood. We were at Brianna House for a simple family lunch when Trey realized the date. We panicked. We were devastated, Kendra. You have to know we love you. I looked at Calvin, who was nodding along with the lie, trying to look like a concerned patriarch. I looked at Brianna, who could barely make eye contact with me. Then I reached into my designer handbag. I did not yell or argue. I simply pulled out my smartphone, unlocked the screen, and turned the media volume all the way up to maximum. "I think you should listen to something I said, holding the phone up between us. Before we left for Napa Valley, I had mailed an invitation to my Aunt Patricia. She was my mother's sister, and although she was easily manipulated by Valerie, she had always harbored a soft spot for me. The guilt of abandoning me had eaten Patricia alive. While I was on my mini-moon, Patricia had forwarded me a voicemail that Valerie had left her on the very morning of my wedding. I pressed play and let the audio file broadcast loudly into the crisp morning air. My mother's smug, condescending voice rang out from the speaker, perfectly clear and undeniably cruel. "Patricia, do not forget we are doing barbecue at Brianna House today," Valerie's voice chirped through the phone. "Make sure you do not answer any calls from Kendra. We are boycotting to teach her a lesson. She thinks she can just marry some random security guard and still get the family blessing. Let her walk down that aisle to empty chairs. She will come crawling back crying when she realizes she cannot afford a life with a man who stands by a door all day. See you at noon. Bring the potato salad." I stopped the audio and slipped the phone back into my bag. The silence outside the luxury building was absolute. The background noise of the city traffic seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but the suffocating weight of the truth. The undeniable proof of their malicious intent stripped away their fake narrative in a matter of seconds. Valerie's mouth hung open, the crocodile tears instantly drying up on her cheeks. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. Brianna took a step backward, looking like she wanted the concrete sidewalk to swallow her whole. For a moment, nobody moved. The masquerade was over. They had not made a mistake. They had actively conspired to ruin the most important day of my life, to punish me for not caring about their shallow obsession with wealth. Calvin was the first to break the silence. His patriarchal ego flared up, a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his grasp. He puffed out his chest and pointed a trembling finger at me. "Now you listen to me, Kendra." Calvin barked, his voice loud and defensive. "You do not get to stand here and humiliate your mother on the street. We made a decision as a family because we were concerned about your financial future. You kept us in the dark. You hid the truth from us. If you had just been honest and told us who Malik really was, we would have been sitting in the front row. You brought this on yourself." The sheer audacity of his statement made my blood run cold. "You wanted a price tag, Dad," I said, my voice dropping low and dangerous. "You wanted a net worth before you could decide if I was worthy of your love. You do not get to blame me for your own toxic greed." Before Calvin could shout another command, the dynamic of the ambush shifted violently. Preston, who had been standing at the back of the group, suddenly shoved past his wife. He pushed Brianna so hard her shoulders slammed into the concrete planter. He did not care about the family drama. He did not care about the wedding or the voicemail or Calvin's fragile pride. Preston was sweating profusely, his expensive dress shirt clinging to his back. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, fixed entirely on the man standing quietly beside me. Preston marched straight up to Malik, stopping just short of invading his personal space. His hands were shaking and his voice cracked with pure, unadulterated panic. Malik, Sir Preston stammered, dropping the arrogant bravado he had worn like armor for the past 5 years. "Please, you have to listen to me. Vanguard is threatening to pull out of the acquisition deal with my firm. I have been getting automated notices all morning that the buyout is paused pending executive review. You cannot do this. If this deal dies, I lose everything. I lose my partner status, my bonuses, my entire career. You have to tell your board to proceed. I am begging you. My family stood frozen, watching the wealthy finance executive they worshipped practically fall to his knees in front of the man they had relentlessly mocked. Malik did not flinch. He stood tall and immaculate, slowly adjusting the custom cuffs of his tailored shirt. He looked at Preston with an expression of cold, calculated indifference. He did not look angry. He looked like a man examining a stain on the sidewalk. Vanguard Elite Security has a very strict code of conduct, Preston Malik said, his deep voice rumbling with absolute authority. We acquire companies that build the future. We look for integrity, vision, and basic human respect. When I evaluate a firm for a multi-million-dollar buyout, I look very closely at the character of the men sitting on the executive board. A man who mocks hard work, a man who belittles people he views as beneath him, a man who lacks basic decency at a family dinner table is not a man I want representing my empire. Preston's face contorted in agony. Please, Malik, he begged, reaching a hand out but stopping himself from making contact. I was stupid. I was trying to impress Calvin. It was just a joke. I will do whatever you want. I will take a pay cut. I will step down from the senior partner track. Just please do not kill the deal. My firm will go bankrupt without Vanguard capital. Malik tilted his head, studying Preston's terrified face for a long, agonizing moment. Then Malik smiled, a sharp, terrifying smile that held absolutely no warmth. You misunderstood the automated notices, Preston Malik said quietly. I did not pull out of the deal. I bought your firm this morning. The acquisition went through at exactly 8 o'clock. Preston let out a breath he had been holding, his shoulders slumping with a massive wave of relief. Thank God, he breathed out, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Thank you, Malik. I promise you will not regret this. I will make sure the transition is flawless. I did not finish speaking. Malik interrupted, his voice slicing through the air like a steel blade. I bought your firm this morning, Preston. And my very first act as the sole owner of the company was restructuring the executive board to remove toxic liabilities. You were terminated an hour ago. You do not have a partner status. You do not have a desk. You do not have a job. Security has already packed your office into a cardboard box. You actually are marrying a security guard. My mother scoffed, tossing my hand-pressed gold foil invitation onto the kitchen counter like it was a piece of junk mail. Do not expect us to sit in some cheap rental hall and watch you throw your life away on a man who checks identification badges at a lobby desk. I sent out 66 invitations to my blood relatives. I received 0 replies. My entire family boycotted my wedding day. I walked down the aisle completely alone, clutching my bouquet with trembling hands. Then right in the middle of our elegant reception, my phone blew up. My mother, my father, my golden child sister, all calling back to back, frantic and desperate. All because a guest posted a 15-second video of our first dance and captioned it, "The CEO of Vanguard Elite Security just tied the knot." Before I tell you how my family, ultimate betrayal, turned into their absolute ruin, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. I stood on the pristine pavement outside our ultra-luxury building, holding my phone up like a weapon. The crisp city breeze whipped around us, but the air between me and my family felt incredibly stagnant. Valerie was still trying to push out crocodile tears, attempting to maintain her ridiculous lie about getting the wedding date wrong. I looked at her ruined mascara and the fake panic in her eyes and felt a deep, profound sense of disgust. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream. I simply pressed the play button on my screen and let the digital audio file do the destroying for me. The recording was crystal clear. It was a voicemail my mother had left for my Aunt Patricia on the very morning I was supposed to walk down the aisle. Patricia had always harbored a lingering sense of guilt regarding how my parents treated me. While Malik and I were on our mini-moon, Patricia had forwarded the message to me with a tearful apology. Now that exact message broadcast loudly across the private entrance of the penthouse building, slicing through the ambient noise of the financial district. Patricia, do not forget, we are doing barbecue at Brianna House today. Valerie's smug, condescending voice chirped from my phone speaker. Make sure you do not answer any calls from Kendra. We are boycotting to teach her a lesson. She thinks she can just marry some random security guard and still get the family blessing. Let her walk down that aisle to empty chairs. She will come crawling back crying when she realizes she cannot afford a life with a man who stands by a door all day. See you at noon. Bring the potato salad. The audio clip ended. I locked my phone and dropped it back into my designer handbag. The silence that followed was absolute and heavy. The undeniable proof of their malicious intent had just been laid out for everyone to hear. There was no flight mix-up, there was no confusing invitation. There was only pure calculated cruelty, meant to break my spirit on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Valerie's mouth hung completely open. The theatrical sobs she had been forcing out just moments ago vanished instantly. Her face drained of all color, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. She stared at the phone in my bag as if it were an explosive device that had just leveled her entire reality. Brianna took a slow step backward, hiding behind her husband Preston. For the first time in 35 years, the golden child had absolutely nothing to say. I looked at my mother, refusing to offer her a single ounce of grace. You wanted to teach me a lesson, I stated, my voice perfectly even. You wanted me to feel small and abandoned. You wanted me to realize that I needed your money and your approval to survive. But the only lesson I learned was that you are exactly the kind of people I never want in my life again. You threw away your own daughter for optics. Valerie stammered desperately, trying to find a way to spin the recording. Kendra, baby, she pleaded, taking a tentative step forward. You are taking that message out of context. I was just upset. We all say things we do not mean when we are emotional. Before I could shut down her pathetic excuse, my father, Calvin, stepped forward. He puffed out his chest, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Calvin had always ruled our family with an iron fist, demanding absolute submission and respect regardless of how wrong he was. He could not handle the fact that I was standing my ground. He could not handle the undeniable truth that his wife had been caught red-handed in a vicious lie. He needed to regain control of the situation, and he resorted to the only tactic he knew: intimidation. That is enough, Kendra, Calvin boomed, his voice echoing off the glass and steel of the luxury building. You will not stand here on the street and humiliate your mother like this. I do not care what that voicemail said. We made a decision as a family because you disrespected us by bringing that man into our lives without consulting me first. He pointed a shaking finger at Malik, who was standing quietly beside me, observing the entire meltdown with calm detachment. You hid the truth from us, Calvin continued, his voice rising with indignant rage. If you had just been honest and told us who he really was, we would have been sitting in the front row of your wedding. You deliberately deceived us to make us look foolish. Now I demand that you apologize to your mother right now and invite us upstairs so we can handle this family business privately. I am your father, and you will show me some respect. I stared at the man who had raised me, feeling a profound sense of closure. The last lingering thread of hope I had for my family snapped completely. He was not sorry they missed my wedding. He was angry because they missed out on a billionaire son-in-law. He wanted respect, but he had never once offered it to me. You want respect, Dad? I asked, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. You want me to apologize to the woman who wanted me to cry alone at the altar. You want to handle this privately because you are embarrassed that your greed has been exposed. You do not get to demand respect from a daughter you threw away. You showed me exactly what my worth was to you. My worth was tied to a job title and a tax bracket. You failed the test, Dad. All of you did. Calvin's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. He took a step toward me, preparing to unleash another wave of patriarchal fury. He wanted to force me into submission, to remind me of my place in his hierarchy. He opened his mouth to shout another command, but he never got the chance. The dynamic of the ambush shifted violently and unexpectedly. Preston, who had been standing silently near the concrete planters, suddenly snapped. The arrogant white finance executive who had mercilessly mocked my husband at the Thanksgiving table was now sweating through his expensive dress shirt. He did not care about Calvin's fragile pride. He did not care about Valerie ruined makeup or Brianna's silent shock. He did not care about the wedding, the voicemail, or the family drama. Preston only cared about one thing: his career. Preston shoved past his wife, pushing Brianna aside, so roughly she stumbled against the pavement. He marched directly toward us, his eyes wide and bloodshot, fixed entirely on Malik. Preston stopped just a few feet away from my husband, his hands trembling visibly at his sides. The arrogant bravado he had worn for the past 5 years was completely gone. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a very high cliff, staring down into the abyss. He took a ragged breath and spoke, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Malik," Sir Preston stammered, addressing the man he had once called a mall cop with absolute terror. "Please, you have to listen to me. Vanguard is threatening to pull out of the acquisition deal with my firm. I have been getting automated notices all morning that the buyout is paused pending executive review. You cannot do this. If this deal dies, I lose everything. I lose my partner status, my bonuses, my entire career. You have to tell your board to proceed. I am begging you." The entire family froze. Calvin dropped his pointing finger, turning to look at his golden son-in-law in absolute shock. Valerie gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Brianna stared at her husband, unable to comprehend why the man who provided her lavish lifestyle was practically falling to his knees in front of a security guard. The power dynamic had completely inverted, and I watched with immense satisfaction as Malik adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, preparing to deliver the final, devastating blow. The morning sun caught the edge of Malik's tailored suit, highlighting the broad line of his shoulders and the effortless power he commanded. He stood perfectly still, allowing Preston's frantic energy to crash against him like a wave hitting a solid brick wall. For years, Preston had paraded around my family gatherings, acting like a master of the universe. He had driven expensive sports cars, flaunted his designer watches, and used his corporate vocabulary to make everyone else feel incredibly small. He had treated my husband like an uneducated laborer. Now the master of the universe was standing on the sidewalk, drenched in nervous sweat, pleading for his professional life. "Please, Malik, you have to understand." Preston begged, his voice pitching higher with every word. "The market is eating my firm alive. We have been bleeding capital for months. We masked it on the quarterly reports, but without the Vanguard buyout, we are completely insolvent. The automated system locked me out of my corporate email account an hour ago. It said the acquisition was halted for executive review. I am up for senior partner on Friday. I have a massive mortgage. I have car payments. Brianna has expectations. If you kill this deal, my entire life is over. Pick up your phone and tell your board to push the capital through." I watched the desperate display with absolute fascination. Preston was stripping away his own facade, revealing the terrifying financial reality my sister had married into. They were not wealthy. They were drowning in debt and relying entirely on a corporate promotion to keep their heads above water. Brianna let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as she heard her husband confess that their lavish lifestyle was nothing but a fragile house of cards. For years, Preston had made it his personal mission to make me feel small. He used to make comments about my event planning business, calling it a cute little party gig. He always made sure to park his luxury car right behind mine to block me in at family events, just to show dominance. Every microaggression, every condescending smirk, it all led to this exact moment. Malik finally finished adjusting his cufflinks. He clasped his large hands in front of him and looked down at Preston. The ambient noise of the city morning seemed to evaporate, leaving nothing but the heavy tension radiating from my husband. "Vanguard Elite Security is not just a company." Preston Malik began, his voice deep, resonant, and completely void of sympathy. "We are a global institution built on discipline, integrity, and absolute respect. We provide protection, corporate defense, and logistical support for some of the most targeted executives and vulnerable populations on the planet. Our clients trust us with their corporate empires and their lives because they know our character is flawless." Malik took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Preston to shrink back against the concrete planter. "When I authorize my acquisitions team to evaluate a financial firm for a multi-million-dollar buyout, I do not just look at your fabricated profit margins and your desperate quarterly projections," Malik said. "I look at the culture of your firm. I look at the men and women sitting on your executive board. I evaluate their character. And let me tell you exactly what I see when I look at you, Preston." Preston swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between Malik and me. I see a man who believes his bank account gives him permission to be cruel. Malik continued, his tone slicing through the crisp air. I see a man who sits at a Thanksgiving dinner table and openly mocks a hardworking black man simply because he wears a tactical uniform. I see an insecure, arrogant bully who relies on his corporate title to mask a profound lack of human decency. Vanguard does not absorb toxic liabilities. We do not do business with men who lack basic respect. Preston's face completely crumbled. His knees buckled slightly, and he reached out a trembling hand, stopping just short of touching Malik's lapel. Malik, I am so sorry, Preston pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. It was a joke. I was just trying to fit in with Calvin. You know how he is about corporate status. I was just playing along to impress my father-in-law. I swear to you I respect what you do. I will do anything you want. I will take a massive pay cut. I will step down from the senior partner track and take a demotion. I will issue a public apology to you and Kendra. Just please make the call. Do not kill the firm. I looked at my father, Calvin. His face turned a sickly shade of gray as he listened to his golden son-in-law throw him directly under the bus. The wealthy white executive Calvin had worshipped the man he had chosen over his own daughter, was now blaming Calvin for his own racist, classist behavior. Valerie let out a quiet whimper, gripping Calvin's arm for support. They were watching their entire social hierarchy collapse in real time. Malik tilted his head, studying the pathetic display in front of him. A cold, terrifying smile touched the corners of his mouth. The kind of smile a predator gives before finishing its hunt. You completely misunderstood the automated alerts you received this morning. Preston Malik said, his tone shifting from philosophical to razor-sharp business execution. Preston blinked, confusion warring with the terror in his eyes. I did not put a pause on the deal, Malik stated smoothly. I did not instruct my team to pull out of the acquisition. The final financial transfers were authorized last night while I was sitting in Napa Valley, enjoying a glass of vintage champagne with my beautiful wife. The buyout is complete. I purchased your entire firm at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. I am now the sole owner of your company and every single asset it holds. Preston let out a massive, shaky breath of relief. A nervous, desperate smile twitched across his pale face. Thank God, he panted, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. Thank you, Malik. I promise you will not regret saving us. I will be your best asset. I will make sure the transition is flawless. I did not say I saved you. Preston. Malik interrupted, his voice dropping like a physical weight crushing the space between them. I said I bought the firm, and my very first act as the new owner was to restructure the executive board to align with Vanguard core values. I personally reviewed the human resources roster this morning. You were officially terminated 1 hour ago. You do not have a partner status. You do not have a desk. You do not have a job. My security team has already packed your office into a cardboard box and escorted you out of the corporate registry. You are done. The words hung in the crisp morning air like a literal death sentence. Preston stared at my husband, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish suffocating on dry land. The arrogant finance executive who had built his entire identity around his corporate status could not process the reality of his sudden absolute ruin. He had spent his entire life coasting on privilege and corporate nepotism, using his position to make everyone else feel inferior. Now, a brilliant self-made black man had legally and systematically dismantled his entire professional existence. Preston's knees finally gave out, and he staggered backward, bumping hard against the heavy concrete planter on the sidewalk. He clutched his chest, gasping for air as the devastating truth crashed down on him. He was unemployed. He was stripped of his power. And the man he had mercilessly bullied was the one holding the axe. Brianna let out a sound that was half shriek and half sob. She rushed over to Preston, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him as if she could physically rattle the job back into his possession. Preston, tell him he is lying, she screamed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive dress shirt. Tell him you are the vice president. You are the senior partner. He cannot just fire you like that. Tell him to give it back. Preston did not look at her. He just stared down at the pavement, his eyes wide and vacant, completely broken. He knew exactly how corporate acquisitions worked. He knew Malik had the absolute legal authority to liquidate his position without a second thought. When Brianna realized that her husband was truly powerless, she slowly turned her head to look at me. The beautiful, spoiled golden child of our family morphed into something entirely different right before my eyes. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. For 35 years, Brianna had navigated life wrapped in a bubble of supreme privilege funded by our parents and maintained by her husband and his corporate wealth. She had never faced a single consequence in her entire existence. She had never been told no. Now that luxury bubble had just violently popped, leaving her exposed and terrified, and she desperately needed someone to blame. "You did this," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You orchestrated this entire thing just to ruin my life. You knew about his company and you set Preston up to fail because you are a jealous, vindictive witch. You have always hated me, Kendra. You have always hated that I am the favorite." I stood next to Malik, watching my younger sister completely lose her grip on reality. I did not raise my voice to match hers. I did not need to. Her hysterical screaming was doing an excellent job of proving my point to anyone walking past our luxury building. Through the tinted glass doors of our lobby, I could see the concierge and the security staff watching the spectacle unfold. Brianna was throwing a toddler-level temper tantrum in the middle of the financial district, entirely unable to process that her actions had brought this upon herself. "You are just bitter because I got the life you always wanted," Brianna yelled, stepping closer, her voice echoing sharply off the glass and steel architecture. "You are mad because Mom and Dad actually love me. They paid for my $100,000 wedding at the country club because I deserved it. I am the daughter who did everything right. I married a man with actual status while you were busy keeping secrets and trying to make us look stupid. You had to drag everyone out to some cheap vineyard in California just to try and compete with me. You are pathetic, Kendra. You will always be second best." I listened to her hurl insults about my wedding while my mind flashed back to the reality of the situation. My custom Napa Valley wedding had actually cost 3 times what her country club reception did. I had paid for every single imported orchid, every drop of vintage champagne, and every custom silk napkin out of my own pocket using the money I earned building my high-end corporate event planning firm. Brianna had absolutely no idea what my life actually looked like because she was too obsessed with her own reflection to ever look my way. She genuinely believed her life was superior because our parents constantly fed her delusions of grandeur to keep her compliant and dependent. But while Brianna was busy screaming about her $100,000 wedding and her supreme status, I noticed something very interesting happening to my parents. Calvin and Valerie were no longer looking at Malik or Preston. They were staring at me with expressions of sheer absolute terror. Calvin's face was dripping with sweat and his breathing had become shallow and erratic. He looked like a man who was about to have a heart attack right there on the sidewalk. Valerie was gripping the leather strap of her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles had turned completely white. They knew exactly where Brianna was taking this conversation, and they knew they were standing on top of a massive catastrophic lie. "Mom and Dad gave me the wedding of the century because I am their priority." Brianna continued, blindly marching toward her own destruction, entirely unaware of the panic setting in behind her. "They gave me everything because I am the one who brings value to this family. What do you bring, Kendra? Nothing. You bring nothing but drama and jealousy. You could not stand seeing me happy in my gorgeous house with my successful husband, so you made your little security guard fire him. You are disgusting." "Brianna, stop!" Calvin suddenly croaked out, his voice weak and trembling. He reached out and grabbed his younger daughter by the arm, trying to physically pull her back from the edge of the cliff. "Just stop talking, Brianna. We need to go home. We need to leave right now. Put your husband in the car and let us go." "No, Dad, let me speak," Brianna snapped, yanking her arm out of his desperate grasp. "She needs to hear the truth. She needs to know that no matter how much money her husband has, she will never be the favorite. She will never be the one you and Mom actually care about. Look at how much you spent on my special day. You showed everyone how much you loved me. You would never do that for her." I looked at my parents, watching the fear completely consume them. For years they had paraded Brianna and her wedding around their social circles as proof of their immense wealth and status. They had let Brianna walk around treating everyone else like peasants, because she believed her parents were financial titans who rewarded her perfection with endless capital. They had fed her ego, stroked her vanity, and starved me of affection, all to maintain an illusion. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between me and my hysterical sister. The cool morning breeze ruffled the edge of my coat, but the air between us felt thick and suffocating. Brianna was breathing heavily, glaring at me with red-rimmed eyes, expecting me to break down crying. She expected me to crumble under the weight of her golden child status, just like I had done when we were teenagers. She wanted to see me broken so she could feel whole again. I looked at Calvin, who was sweating profusely, shaking his head at me in a silent, desperate plea. I looked at Valerie, who had pressed both hands over her mouth, looking like she was about to be physically sick right there on the pavement. Then I locked my eyes directly onto my sister, meeting her furious gaze with absolute chilling serenity. "They did not pay for your wedding, Brianna," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devastatingly clear. "I did." The absolute silence that followed my declaration was so profound, you could hear the distant wail of a city ambulance blocks away. Brianna froze, her mouth hanging slightly open, as her brain desperately tried to process the words I had just spoken. She looked at our mother Valerie, seeking an immediate denial. She wanted Valerie to laugh in my face and tell her I was making up a ridiculous lie born out of pure jealousy. But Valerie did not laugh. Valerie looked like all the blood had been completely drained from her body, leaving her trembling on the pristine pavement. She could not meet Brianna's gaze. She simply stared at the sidewalk, her designer handbag shaking in her tight grip. Brianna turned back to me, shaking her head rapidly. "You are lying," she stammered, her voice lacking the hysterical conviction it held just seconds ago. "Mom and Dad paid for everything. They booked the exclusive country club. They bought my imported floral arrangements. They wrote the checks because they actually wanted me to have a perfect day. You are just trying to steal my moment because you had to marry a security guard at some cheap vineyard. You could never afford my lifestyle. You are just an event planner making a basic salary." I did not argue with her delusion. I simply reached into my designer handbag. As a high-end corporate event planner, I lived my entire life organized by files, contracts, and irrefutable documentation. I had carried a specific manila folder with me for the past 2 years, hoping I would never actually have to use it. I kept it safely stored in my home office, a silent testament to the sacrifices I had made for a family that never appreciated me. But as I pulled the crisp folder from my bag, the satisfying weight of it felt like absolute justice. I opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of financial receipts, bank transfer confirmations, and vendor invoices. I took 2 deliberate steps forward, closing the distance between us. I shoved the paperwork directly against Brianna's chest, forcing her to grab the documents before they fluttered to the concrete sidewalk. "Read them," I commanded, my voice echoing with unshakable authority. "Read the name on the top of every single invoice, Brianna. Read the name of the company that saved your precious perfect day." Brianna's hands shook violently as she looked down at the top sheet of paper. It was the final paid invoice for her lavish country club venue. Her eyes darted across the black ink, reading the stamped confirmation of a $100,000 payment. But it was not signed by Calvin. It was not signed by Valerie. Brianna's voice quivered as she read the bold printed text aloud. "Crown Event Holdings," she whispered, reading the name of the limited liability company. "That is right," I said, taking another step closer, pushing her further out of her delusional reality. "2 years ago, while you were busy trying on custom silk gowns and demanding imported roses, our parents were quietly drowning. Calvin had made a series of catastrophic financial investments, trying to keep up with the wealthy social circle you so desperately wanted to impress for Preston. They were facing imminent bankruptcy. They were about to lose everything, including the massive deposits on your perfect wedding. Your luxury vendors were threatening to cancel. The prestigious country club was preparing to release your date. Our parents were absolutely terrified of the public humiliation. They knew that if Preston's affluent family found out they were broke, the wedding would be called off." I looked at Valerie, who was now silently weeping, wiping her eyes with a tissue. I could not bear to watch the family name be dragged through the mud. I continued, making sure every word landed like a physical strike. "Even after everything you all had done to me, I still possessed a basic sense of loyalty. So I stepped in. I used the capital I had built from my own highly successful event planning firm to create Crown Event Holdings. I operated as a proxy, an anonymous angel investor who quietly assumed their crippling debt and paid off every single one of your wedding vendors in full. I pointed to the stack of papers in Brianna's trembling hands. I bought your luxury venue, Brianna. I bought your imported flowers. I paid for the 5-course gourmet meal you fed to Preston arrogant friends. I gave you the wedding of the century, while you spent the entire reception making snide remarks about my career. You paraded around that country club acting like royalty, while the sister you constantly belittled footed the entire bill. Preston, who was still leaning against the concrete planter, slowly looked up. As a finance executive, he knew exactly what a proxy limited liability company bailout meant. He stared at the documents in his wife's hands, the reality of his situation sinking even deeper. He had just been fired by a billionaire, and his entire high society marriage was built on a charitable handout from the woman he had relentlessly bullied. Brianna stared at the papers, the color completely washing out of her face. The realization that her entire elite status was funded by the sister she considered a failure was breaking her mind. Her perfect rich husband was now unemployed, and her perfect expensive wedding was a mirage. Her entire identity was a manufactured illusion. Malik stood beside me, his presence a calm, steady anchor. He did not say a word, allowing me to claim my victory and dismantle the toxic hierarchy that had suffocated me for 35 years. He watched with quiet pride as I finally stood up to the people who had tried to bury me. But the true devastation was not happening to Brianna. It was happening to my father. Calvin had been staring at the paperwork in Brianna's trembling hands, his eyes locked onto the bold printed name, Crown Event Holdings. For 2 years he had praised this anonymous corporate savior, bragging to his country club friends that a mysterious high-level investment group had seen the immense value in his portfolio and stepped in to restructure his debt. I had built his entire recovering ego around the idea that he was backed by elite corporate giants who recognized his financial brilliance. Because his patriarchal pride would never allow him to accept charity from the daughter he deemed a disappointment, I had deliberately hidden my identity behind the corporate veil. I knew that if he saw my name on those checks, he would have rather lost the house than admit he needed my help. Now the truth was stripping away his last shred of dignity. Calvin's face turned a sickly, ghostly pale. His eyes, wide with absolute horror, darted from the invoice in Brianna's hands directly to my face. The realization hit him like a massive runaway freight train. He remembered the exact terms of the financial bailout he had signed 2 years ago. He knew that Crown Event Holdings did not just pay for his youngest daughter's lavish wedding. The anonymous investment firm had also purchased the primary debt to prevent his assets from going into foreclosure. Calvin suddenly realized that the daughter he had banned from his dinner table, the daughter he had abandoned on her wedding day, was the sole owner of the limited liability company that held the actual deed to his house. Calvin snatched the stack of papers right out of Brianna's trembling hands. The thick vendor invoices crumpled slightly in his sweaty grip as he pulled them close to his face. His eyes darted wildly across the black ink, scanning the payment confirmations and the official limited liability company letterhead. His lips moved silently as he read the name Crown Event Holdings over and over again, as if trying to force the letters to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The majestic patriarch of our family, the man who demanded absolute submission from everyone around him, was visibly trembling on the sidewalk. For 2 entire years, Calvin had walked around his sprawling 6-bedroom suburban estate with his chest puffed out. He had boasted to his neighbors and his wealthy country club friends that a highly exclusive private investment firm had recognized his financial genius and restructured his debt. I had built a massive fortress of ego around that anonymous corporate bailout. Now I was standing right in front of him, holding a sledgehammer to that fortress. "This is impossible," Calvin stammered, his deep voice cracking into a high-pitched wheeze. Crown Event Holdings bought the primary debt on the estate. The bank was going to foreclose on the property. The lawyers said it was a private equity acquisition. I did not blink. I did not offer him a single ounce of comfort. I simply looked at the man who had abandoned me on my wedding day and delivered the absolute crushing truth. "The lawyers said what I paid them to say, Dad." I replied, my voice ringing with crystal clear authority. 2 years ago, you made a series of incredibly reckless investments trying to keep up with Preston's affluent family. You completely liquidated your assets and you failed. The bank was exactly 48 hours away from hammering a foreclosure notice onto the front door of your precious mansion. You were going to lose everything. You were going to be publicly humiliated in front of your entire elite social circle. Valerie let out a loud, dramatic sob, covering her face with her hands. She knew exactly how close they had come to total financial ruin, and the memory of that panic was flooding back to her. I stepped closer, closing the distance between me and my father. I did not want him to miss a single word. I knew you were drowning. I continued, keeping my tone perfectly even. And even after a lifetime of you treating me like a complete disappointment, I still had this pathetic, lingering hope that if I saved you, you might finally love me. So I took the capital I earned from my own business, the business you constantly mocked, and I created Crown Event Holdings. I operated as an anonymous proxy. I bought your debt directly from the bank. I paid off your outstanding loans in full. Calvin shook his head, his eyes wide and bloodshot. No, he gasped, taking a slight step backward. No, you do not have that kind of capital. You are just an event planner. You cannot afford our mortgage. I can afford it because I actually work for a living. I snapped back, the years of suppressed anger finally bleeding into my words. I do not spend my money trying to impress people who do not care about me. I used my own hard-earned wealth to save your home. I hold the paper, Dad. I own the debt. I hold the actual deed to the massive suburban estate you live in. The reality of my words dropped over the group like a suffocating blanket. The absolute irony of the situation was almost too poetic to be real. They had spent my entire adult life making me feel like an unwelcome guest in their world. They had treated me like a financial burden, even though I had never asked them for a single dime. They had paraded their wealth around, demanding respect and obedience, while secretly drowning in their own financial incompetence. And through it all, I was the one keeping a roof over their heads. The home you banned me from, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The home where you hosted Thanksgiving dinner and told me I should be embarrassed for bringing a security guard to your table. The home where you demanded I sit quietly while Preston insulted my husband. That exact same home is legally my property. You are living under my roof. Brianna let out a quiet, whimpering sound. She looked at Preston, who was still staring at the ground, completely defeated. Brianna realized in that exact moment that she had absolutely no safety net left in this world. Her husband was unemployed and blacklisted from the finance sector by a billionaire. Her perfect, expensive wedding was a charity handout from the sister she hated. And her parents, the people she thought were invincible, titans of wealth, were completely broke and living in a house owned by the very woman they had all boycotted. Her entire golden child existence had been vaporized in less than 20 minutes. Valerie sank down onto the edge of the concrete planter, weeping uncontrollably. She was mourning the loss of her social status, the loss of her wealthy son-in-law, and the terrifying realization that her entire life was now in the hands of the daughter she had gleefully abandoned. She looked up at Malik, who stood beside me like a silent, impenetrable fortress, realizing that the man she had mocked held the power to destroy her son-in-law, while her discarded daughter held the power to render her homeless. But Calvin did not weep. Calvin could not handle the emotional devastation of being subjugated by a woman he considered his inferior. His entire identity was built on patriarchal dominance and arrogant pride. The sheer humiliation of knowing that his scapegoat daughter had bailed him out and now held the deed to his house pushed him past the point of panic and straight into blinding, irrational rage. He could not accept defeat. He had to regain control of the narrative. He had to force me back into submission. Calvin aggressively shoved the stack of invoices back into Brianna's hands and straightened his posture. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and puffed out his chest, attempting to physically dominate the space between us. His face flushed a dark, dangerous red, and the veins in his thick neck bulged as he prepared his ultimate demand. "I am your father," Calvin bellowed, his voice echoing violently across the quiet morning street. The sudden shift in his demeanor from terrified debtor back to arrogant dictator was jarring, but entirely predictable. He was cornered, and he was lashing out with the only weapon he had left: his misplaced sense of parental authority. He took a heavy, aggressive step toward me, raising his hand as if he were about to issue a command that would magically erase the last 10 minutes of reality. "You will fix this right now, Kendra." Calvin roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of raw panic and furious indignation. "You will call whatever corporate lawyers you hired, and you will transfer the deed of my house back into my name by the end of the day. You do not get to hold my property hostage. You do not get to stand here and play God with my life. I am the patriarch of this family. I gave you life. You owe me your absolute loyalty, and you will surrender that deed immediately because family protects family." He stood there panting heavily, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He genuinely believed that if he shouted loud enough, his patriarchal authority would magically override the binding legal contracts sitting in my designer handbag. For my entire life, Calvin had used his booming voice and his intimidating physical presence to force everyone around him into absolute submission. Whenever my mother Valerie stepped out of line, he would shout her down. Whenever my sister Brianna threw a tantrum, he would bellow until she quieted. And whenever I tried to assert my independence, he would roar about respect and duty until I retreated into silence. But I was no longer a frightened teenager, desperate for her father to love her. I was a 35-year-old self-made woman, standing next to a billionaire husband who loved me unconditionally. I looked at Calvin raising his hand and puffing out his chest, and I felt absolutely nothing but profound, overwhelming pity. "Family protects family," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet, but laced with an icy authority that made Calvin actually take a half-step backward. I let those 3 words hang in the crisp city air, forcing him to hear the absolute hypocrisy of his own demand. The ambient noise of the financial district seemed to fade into a dull hum as I locked my eyes directly onto his. "You have the absolute nerve to stand on the sidewalk in front of my building and demand protection?" I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "Where was that protection yesterday, Dad? Where was your unwavering sense of family loyalty when I was standing in my bridal suite staring at 66 empty chairs? You let my entire bloodline boycott my wedding day because my husband did not meet your fake manufactured wealth standards. You actively coordinated a mass abandonment to teach me a lesson. You threw your own daughter away for optics." Calvin swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously against his tight shirt collar. He tried to interrupt me to spin another desperate lie, but I did not let him speak. I unleashed 35 years of suppressed anger, letting it flow out of me with surgical precision. "For my entire life, I have watched you and Mom pour every single ounce of your love, your money, and your attention into Brianna," I said, pointing a sharp finger at my sister, who was cowering behind her unemployed husband. "I watched you buy her designer clothes while I worked double shifts to pay for my own college tuition. I watched you applaud her mediocre achievements while completely ignoring my business milestones. I spent decades swallowing my pride and shrinking myself down just so your fragile ego could remain intact. And when your relentless greed finally drove you to the brink of absolute financial ruin, I was the one who stepped up to save you." Valerie let out a loud, tragic wail, burying her face in her hands. She could not bear to listen to the truth being laid out so bare and undeniable. But I kept my eyes locked on Calvin, refusing to let him look away from the wreckage he had created. "I bought the debt on your massive suburban estate because I did not want to see you and Mom thrown out onto the street." I continued, my tone relentless and unforgiving. "I paid for Brianna $100,000 country club wedding because I knew that if Preston wealthy family found out you were secretly broke, the humiliation would destroy you. I did all of that anonymously because I actually cared about protecting your dignity. I gave you grace, Dad. I gave you a financial lifeline, and I asked for absolutely nothing in return. I just wanted you to be safe." Calvin's jaw trembled. He looked down at the concrete pavement, completely stripped of his arrogant bravado. The realization of what I had done for him, contrasting violently with what he had done to me, was finally penetrating his thick skull. "And how did you repay my kindness?" I demanded, my voice echoing off the glass walls of the luxury lobby. "You repaid me by making fun of the man I love. You repaid me by telling me I should be embarrassed to bring Malik to your Thanksgiving table. You repaid me by leaving me to walk down the aisle completely alone. You chose a backyard barbecue over your own daughter because you thought I was marrying a man who could not elevate your social status. I took another step closer, stopping just inches from his flushed, sweating face. Malik stood right behind me, a silent, imposing guardian, ensuring Calvin would never dare to cross a physical line. You are not a patriarch, Dad, I said, my words slicing through his remaining pride like a scalpel. You are a coward. You built your entire identity on wealth you did not actually possess and status you did not actually earn. You demand respect, but you have never done a single thing to warrant it. You sold your soul to impress Preston and his high society friends, and now Preston is unemployed, and you are living in a house owned by the daughter you threw away. You failed as a father. You failed as a man. And your authority over me is officially dead. Calvin's shoulders slumped forward. The physical transformation was startling. The mighty dictator who had terrorized our family for decades suddenly looked like a small, terrified old man. He looked at Valerie, who was still weeping on the planter, and then at Brianna, who was staring at the ground in absolute shell-shocked silence. He had no allies left. He had no leverage. He was completely at my mercy. Kendra, please, Calvin whispered, his voice cracking. He reached out a trembling hand, his eyes pleading with me. I am sorry. I was wrong. I was blinded by the money and the prestige. I made a terrible mistake. But please, you cannot do this to us. You cannot hold the deed to our home over our heads. We will pay you back. I will find a way to get the capital. Just transfer the property back to us. Give us another chance to be a real family. I looked at the tears welling up in his eyes. I looked at the genuine desperation etched across his aging face. A year ago, that apology might have worked. A year ago, I might have crumbled under the weight of his sudden vulnerability and handed him whatever he wanted just to keep the peace. But I was no longer the scapegoat of the family. I was the architect of my own peace, and I knew that giving them another chance would only invite more toxicity into my life. There are no second chances. Dad, I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Family protects family, and you proved yesterday that I am not your family. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. I turned away from his pleading eyes and reached into my designer handbag. My fingers brushed past my wallet and my keys, finding exactly what I had prepared for this very moment. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope bearing the official seal of the law firm that represented Crown Event Holdings. I held the envelope out, extending it directly toward my father's chest. Calvin hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting from the heavy manila envelope in my outstretched hand up to my face. The fierce patriarchal rage that had puffed up his chest just moments ago was rapidly deflating, replaced by a creeping, paralyzing dread. He raised his trembling hands and took the envelope from my grasp, holding it as if it were a live explosive. The thick paper rustled loudly in the quiet morning air as he tore open the seal. He pulled out a pristine stack of legal documents stamped with the official seal of the state and printed on the heavy bond paper of my corporate attorneys. I watched his bloodshot eyes scan the bold capitalized letters at the very top of the first page. It was a formal notice of default and intent to foreclose. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost standing on the pavement. His jaw went slack, and the documents began to shake violently in his hands. He looked up at me, his voice barely a hollow whisper as he asked what this was. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the calm, measured precision of a woman who had spent years planning for this exact contingency. When I created Crown Event Holdings and purchased the primary debt on your estate, I became your sole creditor. I explained, my words slicing through his remaining dignity. For the past 2 years, you have not been paying your mortgage to a faceless bank, Dad. You have been operating under a highly generous grace period that I personally authorized. I instructed my legal team to freeze your interest and halt all collection efforts so you and Mom could maintain your precious high society illusion. I gave you the ultimate safety net. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the physical space between us. That grace period expired yesterday, I said, keeping my gaze locked onto his terrified eyes. It expired the exact second I stood at the altar and looked out at 66 empty chairs. You breached the unspoken contract of our family. You abandoned me, so I am officially calling in the loan. Calvin staggered backward, bumping into Valerie, who let out a sharp, terrified gasp. He looked down at the legal papers again, desperately hoping he had misread the unforgiving legal jargon. He flipped to the second page, searching for a loophole, a mistake, anything that would invalidate the nightmare unfolding in front of him. But there was no mistake. My lawyers were the best in the city. You have exactly 30 days to secure the capital and buy the house back from my limited liability company. I continued, laying out the brutal, absolute reality of his situation. You have 30 days to find a bank willing to give a massive mortgage to a man with a ruined credit history and zero liquid assets. If you cannot produce the funds by the end of the month, the eviction process will be finalized. The local sheriff will arrive at your front door and you will be escorted off the premises. The estate will be liquidated, and whatever is left of your fake social standing will be completely wiped out. Calvin looked like he could not breathe. He was practically hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he turned his head, frantically scanning the group for a lifeline. His eyes naturally landed on Preston, the golden son-in-law, the wealthy finance executive who was supposed to be the family ultimate financial shield. Calvin opened his mouth, preparing to beg Preston to dip into his corporate funds, to arrange a bridge loan, to do absolutely anything to save the family mansion. But I cut him off before he could even form the words. "Do not bother looking at Preston," I said, a cold, victorious smile touching my lips. "You cannot ask him for a bailout, Dad. Did you forget what just happened 5 minutes ago? Your perfect son-in-law is completely unemployed. His firm was bought out by my husband, and his career in the finance sector was terminated this morning. He does not have a partner status. He does not have a bonus structure. He does not even have an office to go back to." Preston refused to meet Calvin's gaze. The former finance executive simply stared down at his expensive leather shoes, completely humiliated and broken. He had absolutely nothing left to offer. I shifted my gaze to Brianna, who was openly weeping, now her face buried in her trembling hands. "Since Preston has no income, I guess. Brianna cannot lend you the money either," I added, twisting the knife with absolute precision. "She is going to be too busy trying to figure out how to pay her own luxury car leases and country club membership fees without a 6-figure corporate salary to back her up. The Bank of Preston is officially closed, and the Bank of Kendra just evicted you. You have absolutely no one left to save you." The realization of their total, inescapable ruin crashed down upon them like a collapsing building. They were completely isolated. They had alienated the only person who actually possessed the capital and the willingness to protect them. They had traded a daughter who loved them for a son-in-law who used them, and now they were going to lose everything because of it. The psychological breakdown of my family happened right there on the pristine concrete outside my luxury building. Calvin dropped his hands to his sides, the legal documents slipping from his grasp and scattering across the sidewalk. The man who had spent his entire life demanding respect and submission was now staring at the ground, entirely broken and defeated. He had nothing left to say. There were no more commands he could bark, no more patriarchal threats he could leverage. I was a ruined man. But Valerie could not accept defeat. My mother's entire identity was wrapped up in her social status, her massive house, and her ability to parade her wealth in front of her judgmental friends. The thought of being evicted, of having moving trucks pull up to her estate and carry away her belongings while the neighbors watched, was a fate worse than death. It broke her mind completely. Valerie let out a loud, agonizing wail. Her knees buckled beneath her designer dress, and she collapsed directly onto the hard pavement. She did not fall gracefully. She dropped like a stone, her hands scraping against the concrete as she let out a barrage of hysterical sobs. Her expensive handbag tipped over, spilling her belongings onto the street, but she did not care. But she did not look at me. She did not beg the daughter she had abandoned. In a final desperate display of her deeply ingrained toxic patriarchy, she turned her tear-stained face away from me entirely. She looked up at the towering, immaculate figure standing quietly by my side. She looked at Malik, the man she had mocked, the man she had dismissed as a minimum wage guard, the man who now controlled the destiny of everyone she loved. Valerie grabbed the edge of Malik's tailored trousers, her knuckles white with desperation. "Malik, please," she sobbed, looking up at him with wild, terrified eyes. "You are a good man. You are a reasonable man. Please, you have to stop this. You have to intervene right now. She is out of control. She is destroying her own family out of spite. Please, you have to talk some sense into her. You are her husband. You have to control your wife. Valerie knelt on the cold concrete, clutching the fabric of my husband-tailored trousers. Her tear-streaked face was turned upward, staring at Malik with a look of desperate, absolute pleading. In her deeply ingrained toxic worldview, she genuinely believed that a wealthy, powerful man would naturally want to control an outspoken woman. She thought she could appeal to his patriarchal ego. She thought Malik would look at me, decide I was being too harsh, and order me to hand over the deed to the family estate just to keep the peace. Malik looked down at the woman who had spent the last 2 years actively trying to sabotage our relationship. He did not flinch. He did not offer her a single ounce of pity. He calmly took a step backward, gently but firmly forcing the fabric of his trousers out of her desperate white-knuckled grip. He looked at Valerie and let out a low, cold laugh that echoed sharply across the pristine entrance of the luxury building. It was not a joyful sound. It was the sound of a man looking at an absolute joke. "You are begging the wrong person," Valerie Malik said, his deep voice rumbling with quiet, terrifying authority. "My wife is the boss. I am just the security guard." The absolute poetry of those words struck Valerie like a physical blow to the chest. She gasped, slumping backward against the edge of the concrete planter. She finally realized that her manipulation tactics were completely useless. She had absolutely no power here. Malik did not wait for her to formulate another pathetic excuse. He simply raised his right hand and made a subtle, deliberate gesture toward the massive glass doors of the lobby. What my family did not know was that the elite security team guarding our ultra-luxury building was actually a direct subsidiary of Vanguard Elite Security. The men standing behind the marble reception desk knew exactly who Malik was. He was their ultimate boss, the chief executive officer of their entire corporate network. And when he gave a command, they moved with absolute flawless precision. Within seconds, the sliding glass doors parted. 4 men clad in impeccable dark suits stepped out onto the pavement. They were massive, highly trained, and completely silent. They moved in perfect synchronization, forming a solid, intimidating barrier between me and the toxic wreckage of my family. The lead security officer stepped directly in front of Calvin. His posture was respectful but undeniably firm. "Sir," the officer said, his voice completely void of emotion, "you are currently trespassing on private property. I need to ask you and your party to vacate the premises immediately. If you do not comply, we will be forced to physically escort you off the property and contact local law enforcement." Calvin's face flushed a deep, dangerous red. His patriarchal pride flared up one last time, a dying ember of the dictator he used to be. He puffed out his chest, trying to look down at the security officer. "I am not going anywhere," Calvin barked, his voice cracking with desperation. "I am talking to my daughter. You do not have the right to put your hands on me. I will sue this entire building." The officer did not argue. He simply took a step forward, closing the physical distance, and placed a heavy, authoritative hand on Calvin's shoulder. The message was clear. The time for talking was officially over. Calvin's entire body deflated. The reality of the threat finally penetrated his arrogant skull. I was completely broke, facing imminent eviction, and staring down a team of elite corporate security guards who would gladly hand him over to the police. He swatted the officer's hand away, muttering curses under his breath, and turned to grab Valerie by the arm. "Get up, Valerie," Calvin hissed, hauling his weeping wife off the concrete planter. "We are leaving." The scene that followed was the most pathetic display I had ever witnessed in my entire life. As the security team systematically corralled my family down the sidewalk, moving them away from the private entrance, the illusion of their perfect high society family completely shattered. The moment they realized I was no longer their scapegoat, they instantly turned on each other like starving wolves. Calvin started shouting at Valerie, blaming her for leaving that voice message on Patricia's phone. He screamed that her big mouth had just cost them their multi-million-dollar mansion. Valerie shrieked back at him, hitting his shoulder with her designer handbag, sobbing that it was his reckless financial investments that put them in debt in the first place. Brianna was crying so hard she could barely walk, stumbling in her expensive heels. She grabbed Preston's arm, begging him to call his corporate contacts to find another job. But Preston violently yanked his arm out of her grasp. He spun around and screamed right in Brianna's face, blaming her entire family for ruining his career. He yelled that marrying her was the worst financial decision he had ever made. I stood next to Malik, watching them walk down the city block. They were screaming, pointing fingers, and tearing each other apart right there on the public sidewalk. They had spent 35 years projecting an image of absolute perfection, but the second their wealth and status were stripped away, there was absolutely no love left between them. They were just four greedy, miserable people bound together by mutual resentment. The heavy glass doors of the lobby slid shut behind the security team, sealing out the noise of their bitter, screaming match. The sudden silence was beautiful. It felt like a massive, crushing weight had just been lifted off my chest. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp morning air fill my lungs. I was free. I was officially untethered from the toxic obligation I had carried for my entire adult life. Malik wrapped his strong arm around my waist, pulling me close against his side. He pressed a warm kiss to my temple, his hand resting securely on my hip. "Are you okay, Mrs. Vanguard?" he asked, his voice incredibly soft and grounding. I leaned my head against his shoulder, watching the empty sidewalk where my family had stood just moments ago. "I have never been better," I answered honestly. We turned and walked back into the lobby, the concierge giving us a polite nod as we passed the marble desk. We stepped into the private elevator, and Malik swiped his secure keycard, pressing the button for the penthouse level. As the elevator doors glided shut, sealing us in a quiet, luxurious metal box, I felt the gentle pull of gravity as we began to ascend toward our home. That was when I felt a distinct buzz radiating from my designer handbag. I unclasped my purse and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was lit up with a new text message notification. It was from my brother Trey. Trey had stayed back in Atlanta. He was too lazy to book a last-minute flight and join the ambush in person. But Brianna or Valerie must have called him the absolute second. They got kicked off the pavement because he was already launching his own pathetic damage control campaign from 3 time zones away. I opened the text message thread, reading the paragraph he had sent. I almost laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of his words. "Hey Kendra," Trey wrote. "Look, I just heard what happened outside your building. Things got way out of hand. I want you to know I was just following mom orders yesterday. I never wanted to miss your wedding. You know I love you. Congratulations to you and Malik, by the way. Listen, since Preston is out of the picture now, I was thinking Malik might be hiring at the executive level. I have a lot of management experience. I could bring a massive amount of value to Vanguard, and I really think it is important to keep the wealth in the family. Call me when you settle in. Let us talk numbers." I stared at the screen, completely amazed by his delusion. Less than 24 hours ago, he was standing at a backyard barbecue, laughing at the idea of me throwing my life away on a mall cop. He told me not to call them for a handout when we could not make rent. Now he was sitting in Atlanta, actively trying to leverage his blood relation to secure an executive salary from the very man he had mocked. Malik glanced over my shoulder, reading the text message as the elevator continued its smooth ascent. He let out a low, amused chuckle, shaking his head. "What is the play, boss?" Malik asked, stepping back and giving me the floor. I looked at the text message. I did not type out a long, angry response detailing exactly why he was a massive hypocrite. I did not curse him out or explain that Vanguard would never hire a man who lacked basic loyalty. They had already stolen enough of my time and my emotional energy. I was not giving them a single second more. I simply pressed the information icon next to Trey's name. I scrolled down to the very bottom of the screen past his contact information and his shared photos. I tapped the red text that read, "Block caller." The system prompted me to confirm my decision, and I pressed yes without a fraction of hesitation. I deleted the entire message thread, watching his name vanish from my phone completely. The digital cord was officially severed. My parents were evicted. My sister was stripped of her golden status. My brother was blocked. The purge was absolute and final. The elevator chimed, softly announcing our arrival at the penthouse level. The polished doors slid, revealing the bright, sprawling sanctuary we had built together. I slipped my phone back into my bag, took my husband's hand and stepped forward, ready to live the rest of my beautiful, peaceful life. The peace I felt inside our penthouse was absolute and entirely unfamiliar. For the first time in my life, I was not walking on eggshells. I was not checking my phone every 5 minutes to see if I had missed a demanding text from my mother or a condescending remark from my father. Malik and I spent the next week settling into our life as a married couple. We cooked dinner together, we drank coffee on the balcony overlooking the city skyline, and we simply enjoyed the quiet sanctuary we had built. I genuinely thought the worst was over. I thought my family had finally realized they were outmatched and would quietly retreat into the shadows to deal with their financial ruin. But toxic people never go down quietly. When a narcissist loses control over their favorite scapegoat, they do not reflect on their actions. They change the narrative to make themselves the ultimate victim. Exactly 7 days after the ambush, outside our luxury building, my phone started buzzing with messages from mutual acquaintances and distant relatives back in Atlanta. I opened my social media applications and stepped right into a digital war zone. Brianna and Trey had launched a massive, highly coordinated smear campaign across every platform available. They were absolutely determined to destroy my reputation before their own social circle could discover the truth about their impending eviction. Brianna had posted a 20-minute video of herself sitting in her pristine suburban living room, pushing out fake tears for the camera. She wore no makeup and an oversized sweater, perfectly curating the image of a heartbroken sister. In the video, she spun a completely fabricated story about how I had maliciously hidden my billionaire husband from the family because I was ashamed of them. She cried about how she had spent months helping me plan my wedding, only for me to intentionally send them the wrong date so they would miss the ceremony. But the most damaging lie was about the house. Brianna stared directly into the camera and sobbed, telling her thousands of followers that I had used my husband's immense corporate wealth to illegally manipulate bank documents and steal our childhood home. She claimed I was evicting our elderly parents out of pure greed and spite, just so I could sell the property and buy more designer clothes. Trey was just as bad. He took to his social media pages, posting long, aggressive rants about how I had abandoned my black family the second I got a taste of elite corporate money. He called me a sellout and a traitor. He claimed I was using Vanguard elite security to intimidate our father and silence our mother. He tagged local Atlanta society blogs and gossip pages, actively trying to drag Malik's reputation through the mud alongside mine. The hypocrisy was staggering. The very people who had boycotted my wedding because they thought I was marrying a minimum wage guard were now publicly crying that I had abandoned them for a billionaire lifestyle. Within hours, the Atlanta community started to gossip. The high society circles my parents desperately clung to were buzzing with the scandal. Ladies from my mother country club and women from our old neighborhood started leaving nasty comments on my business pages. Distant relatives who had not spoken to me in years were suddenly sending me angry messages calling me a heartless monster for throwing my parents out on the street. They had absolutely no idea that my parents were completely broke or that Preston had been fired. They only knew the perfectly crafted victim narrative Brianna was feeding them. I sat at the kitchen island gripping my phone, my blood boiling hot in my veins. The sheer injustice of it made me want to scream. I had the receipts. I had the bank transfers proving I had saved them from bankruptcy 2 years ago. I had the voicemail of Valerie laughing about boycotting my wedding. I could end their entire smear campaign with a single screenshot. I wanted to post the audio file. I wanted to expose Preston termination. I wanted to drag them down into the digital mud and force everyone to see exactly how vile they truly were. I unlocked my screen, pulling up the voicemail audio file, my thumb hovering over the share button. Malik walked into the kitchen, fresh from a morning run. He took one look at my tense posture and the glowing screen of my phone, and he knew exactly what was happening. He walked over gently, taking the phone out of my hand and setting it face down on the marble countertop. "Arguing on the internet is for amateurs," Kendra Malik said, his voice a low, calming rumble that instantly grounded my racing heart. "When hyenas bark, you do not get down on all fours and bark back. You let them exhaust themselves. But they are lying about us," I protested, feeling the hot sting of frustrated tears in my eyes. "They are trying to ruin my business reputation. They are making people believe I stole their house. I have the proof, Malik. I can shut them up right now." Malik poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the island toward me. He leaned against the counter, looking completely unbothered by the digital circus happening in Atlanta. If you post those receipts online, you are playing their game, he explained, taking a slow sip of his coffee. You are lowering yourself to a public shouting match, and people will always debate screenshots. They will say the audio is fake or the documents are altered. Never argue your case in a venue where your opponent controls the comments section. We are going to let them dig their own graves. We are going to let them scream and cry and gather all the sympathy they can possibly muster. And then we are going to drop a reality check so massive they will never be able to show their faces in public again. I looked at my brilliant husband, realizing exactly why he commanded a global empire. He did not react to noise. He executed strategy. "What is the plan?" I asked, wiping the angry tears from my eyes and sitting up straighter. "We are going to host a party," Malik said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. We spent the entire weekend working in complete silence. We ignored the hateful comments, we ignored the dramatic videos, and we ignored the gossiping relatives. Instead, we tapped into my elite event planning network and Vanguard massive public relations department. We secured the grand ballroom at the most prestigious luxury hotel in downtown Atlanta. We hired the best catering teams, the best floral designers, and the best live entertainment the city had to offer. We drafted invitations on heavy gold embossed cardstock. We were hosting a highly publicized charity gala sponsored directly by Vanguard Elite Security. And we did not just invite our friends. We invited every single high society connection, every wealthy country club member, every prominent business owner, and every corporate associate my family desperately clung to for their social survival. We invited the exact audience Brianna was currently performing for online. The trap was beautifully set. The entire elite circle of Atlanta was about to gather in one room, and we were going to deliver our ultimate public statement. The night of the Vanguard Elite Security Charity Gala arrived with absolute perfection. The grand ballroom of the luxury hotel was transformed into a breathtaking sanctuary of elegance. We had invited the absolute upper echelon of Atlanta society, every single country club president, every prominent real estate developer, every wealthy socialite that my mother Valerie and my sister Brianna desperately worshipped was sitting at our tables. They were drinking our vintage champagne and eating our gourmet catered dinner. The local media was there with cameras rolling, eager to cover the massive philanthropic debut of Vanguard in the city. My family was not invited, but their entire social lifeline was sitting right in the palm of my hand. When it was time for the keynote address, I walked up to the microphone wearing a custom emerald green evening gown. Malik stood right beside me, looking like an absolute king in his tailored tuxedo, his hand resting proudly on the small of my back. The room fell into total silence as the elite crowd waited to hear from the woman at the center of the viral internet scandal. They had seen Brianna crying on social media. They had read Trey and his angry rants. They were waiting for me to defend myself. They expected a messy public argument. I did not give them one. I looked out at the sea of wealthy faces and I smiled. I did not mention my mother. I did not mention my father. I did not even say my sister or my brother name. Instead, I announced that Vanguard Elite Security was officially pledging a $10 million endowment to the city of Atlanta. A collective gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. I told the crowd that we were launching a brand new foundation dedicated entirely to providing full-ride college scholarships for underprivileged African American girls. I spoke about the importance of lifting up young women who have the drive and the brilliance to succeed, but lack the financial support to make their dreams a reality. Then I delivered the final devastating blow to my family and their manufactured legacy. I leaned into the microphone and told the room exactly who the foundation was named after. I announced the Beatrice Crown Memorial Scholarship, named in honor of my late grandmother. I told the cameras and the crowd that my grandmother was the only person in my entire bloodline who ever believed in my potential. I stated very clearly that she was the only one who supported me when I had absolutely nothing. I deliberately and publicly excluded my living parents from the legacy of my success. I let the entire high society of Atlanta know that Calvin and Valerie had absolutely no part in my triumphs and would receive absolutely zero grace from my empire. The applause that followed was deafening. The elite crowd did exactly what high society always does. They followed the absolute power. They saw the undeniable proof of Vanguard and its immense wealth and influence. They saw my undeniable grace under pressure. In that exact moment, the wealthy socialites and corporate executives made their choice. They instantly recognized that associating with Calvin and Valerie was social suicide. My parents and Brianna were immediately blacklisted from every exclusive circle they had spent decades trying to infiltrate. The social ruin was swift and completely merciless. Women from Valerie Country Club stopped returning her phone calls. The wealthy neighbors who had once attended their lavish dinner parties suddenly crossed the street to avoid them. Even Trey found himself entirely shut out from local networking events because nobody wanted to associate with a man who publicly harassed a beloved local philanthropist. But the social isolation was nothing compared to the absolute financial devastation that followed. Because Preston had been publicly terminated and humiliated by a billionaire, his career in the finance sector was irreparably ruined. No respectable firm in the country wanted to hire a toxic liability who had been personally fired by the chief executive officer of Vanguard. Preston was completely radioactive. Without his massive corporate salary, Brianna and her luxury lifestyle evaporated overnight. They could not afford their expensive car leases. The dealership arrived and repossessed their matching sports utility vehicles right out of their pristine suburban driveway, while their former friends watched in stunned silence. 30 days after I handed my father the eviction notice, the clock officially ran out. Calvin and Valerie could not secure a loan to buy the house back from my limited liability company. They had zero capital and absolutely zero leverage. The local sheriff arrived at the sprawling six-bedroom suburban estate and enforced the eviction. The mighty patriarch who had demanded my absolute submission was forced to pack his belongings into cardboard boxes and vacate the premises. They defaulted, completely losing the very home I had secretly saved for them 2 years prior. My parents, my sister, and her unemployed husband had absolutely nowhere else to go. Their elite friends had abandoned them. Their credit was completely destroyed. They were forced to pool whatever meager savings they had left just to survive. The family that had mocked me for supposedly marrying a mall cop, the family that had boycotted my wedding because they thought I was poor, was forced to downsize drastically. They all had to cram into a tiny, cramped 3-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The beautiful golden child, the arrogant finance brother-in-law, and the proud patriarch were now living on top of each other, suffocating in the exact kind of poverty they had always despised. I stood on the expansive glass balcony of our penthouse, letting the cool evening wind wash over my face. The sprawling skyline of the city glittered below us, a sea of golden light stretching out as far as the eye could see. The faint sounds of the bustling financial district drifted up to our private sanctuary, but up here everything was perfectly calm. Malik stepped out onto the terrace holding 2 mugs of hot tea. He draped a soft cashmere blanket over my shoulders, pulling me back against his broad chest. I leaned into his warmth, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic mug. We stood there in absolute comfortable silence, watching the city move beneath us. For the first time in my 35 years of life, I did not feel a single ounce of anxiety about my family. I did not wonder what my mother was saying about me to her friends. I did not care what my father thought of my business decisions. I did not feel the burning need to prove my worth to a sister who only viewed me as competition. All of that toxic, heavy baggage had been completely stripped away, leaving nothing but a profound, unshakable sense of clarity. I looked down at the glittering streets, and my mind wandered back to the morning of our wedding in Napa Valley. I remembered standing in the luxurious bridal suite, gripping my phone while Trey laughed over the sound of splashing pool water. I remembered the suffocating terror that gripped my throat when the heavy wooden doors swung open and I saw those 66 empty wooden chairs sitting on the pristine lawn. In that terrible, agonizing moment, I honestly thought my entire world was collapsing. I thought the rejection would completely break me. But reflecting on it now as I stood securely in the arms of the man who loves me unconditionally, I realized a massive, beautiful truth. Walking down that aisle completely alone was the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. Those empty chairs were not a punishment. They were a massive, glaring blessing. The sheer cruelty of their boycott was the brutal catalyst I desperately needed to finally wake up. It cleared out the toxic weight I had carried my entire life. If they had shown up to my wedding and pretended to be a loving family, I would have spent the next 30 years still trying to secretly fund their lifestyle. I would have kept hiding my success to protect their fragile egos. I would have kept allowing them to disrespect my husband just to keep the peace at their holiday dinners. By abandoning me on my wedding day, they handed me the exact key I needed to unlock my own prison cell. I walked down that aisle as a scapegoat, begging for scraps of parental approval, and I reached the altar as a woman who finally understood her own absolute power. My family had spent my entire existence trying to write my story. They wanted to cast me as the bitter, unsuccessful secondary character in Brianna Golden narrative. They wanted me to be the reliable workhorse who quietly fixed their mistakes while they soaked up all the glory. But they severely underestimated the strength it takes to build an empire from the ground up. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was the architect of my own peace. Malik pressed a soft kiss into my hair, pulling me out of my memories and back into our beautiful reality. We do not talk about Calvin, Valerie, Brianna, or Trey anymore. They are completely blocked from our phones, our properties, and our minds. They are currently suffocating in a cramped apartment dealing with the devastating consequences of their own shallow greed. They traded an expansive life of luxury for a tiny box of resentment because they valued status over character. We simply do not give them the power of our attention anymore. Instead, we focus our energy on building our future and pouring our resources into people who actually want to grow. The Beatrice Crown Memorial Scholarship is thriving. We just secured full ride tuition and housing for 50 brilliant, hardworking young African American girls who are starting their college journeys this fall. When I look at those young women and see the determination in their eyes, I know that I am finally channeling my wealth into something that actually matters. I took the painful rejection my family handed me, and I transformed it into a legacy of genuine empowerment. There are no fake country club smiles here. There is only real, tangible impact. I turned around in Malik's arms, wrapping my own arms around his neck and looking up into his dark, steady eyes. He smiled at me, a look of pure, unwavering adoration reflecting the city lights. We had built a fortress of trust and respect that absolutely no one could ever penetrate. We had survived the ultimate betrayal, and we came out on the other side stronger, wealthier, and happier than we had ever been. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp night air fill my lungs completely. I looked back out over the beautiful, glowing city, knowing that my life was finally entirely my own. They boycotted my wedding because they thought I was settling for nothing. In the end, I got everything, and they were left with exactly what they gave me: nothing. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments. Looking back at everything that happened, from the empty chairs at my wedding to the moment I handed my father that eviction notice, I realized the greatest gift my family ever gave me was their absence. For 35 years, I broke my back trying to earn a seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. I thought that if I just proved my success or saved them from their own financial disasters, they would finally see my worth. But toxic people do not value your sacrifices, they only expect them. Walking down that aisle alone was terrifying, but it taught me that you cannot build a healthy future while carrying the heavy chains of familial obligation. True family is not defined by shared blood or a matched social status. Family is about who stands by your side when the cameras are off and the chips are down. Malik and I built our empire on respect and unconditional support, things my parents traded away for a shallow illusion of wealth. I am no longer the family scapegoat because I chose to become the architect of my own peace. Sometimes the absolute best revenge is simply walking away and building a beautiful life without them. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and sanity? Tell me your story in the comments below.